Hello everyone and welcome back to the Horror Hut. Before you drift off, it would be a nice idea if you could leave a comment to let me know where you are listening from. Please don't forget to give the video a like and subscribe to the channel. Right, let's get comfy and relaxed, and let's begin. Story 1, Silent Watchers, Unease in the Forest Cabin. The first morning, everything felt ordinary. The sun spilled gold across the rough wooden floorboards, dappling through the cracked window panes as if no one had touched this cabin in years. I leaned back against the creaky chair, the thin cushion barely soft enough to dull the sting of the splinters beneath. Outside, the trees whispered in a lazy wind, their branches scraping against one another like tired old friends exchanging secrets. I sipped lukewarm coffee, the bitter taste grounding me in a way I wasn't quite ready for. This was supposed to be a retreat, my pause button on a life that had spun too fast. I'd driven 6 hours, winding through narrow roads that vanished into thick patches of pine and fir. The GPS had lost signal somewhere near the turnoff, but I didn't mind. The sense of being utterly alone was exactly what I wanted. No emails, no calls, no one needing anything from me. Just me and the forest. The cabin was small. A single room with a stove, a bed pushed into the corner, and a rickety table where I'd unpacked my few belongings. The scent of old wood mixed with damp earth seeped in through the thin walls. It was the kind of place where every creak and groan felt alive, like the house was breathing around me. I liked that. It made me feel less alone, even though I was. After setting down the last box, I went outside to stretch. The air was cooler than I expected, crisp with the sharp tang of pine needles and moss. I ran my fingers over the rough bark of a nearby cedar tree and felt the grooves dig into my skin. A distant bird caught a raven, maybe its call echoing through the stillness. I closed my eyes and breathed deep. This was peace. Or so I thought. Later that afternoon, I noticed the first odd thing. I'd left my journal on the tabletop, a little battered leather notebook with yellowed pages. When I came back inside, it wasn't where I'd left it. I scanned the room, with its faint smell of dust and decay, heart ticking up a notch. On the floor next to the bed, the journal lay open, pages fluttering as a draft slipped in through the cracked window. I must have knocked it over without realizing. I knelt and closed it carefully, smoothing the cover with a shaky hand. That night, the wind picked up, rattling the loose shutters. I sat by the window, watching the shadows shift in the moonlight. The forest seemed to lean in closer, the branches scratching the glass like fingernails. I told myself it was just the owls settling, the wind playing tricks on my nerves. Still, I double-checked the locks on the door before heading to bed, the cold metal biting into my palm. I woke around 2 a.m. to a sound, a soft scrape against the cabin's outer wall. My breath caught. Silence followed. I lay still, straining to catch any further noise, but only the steady thrum of my heartbeat filled the space. I told myself it was probably a raccoon or a stray deer brushing past the porch. But when I swung my legs over the edge of the bed, my feet found something unexpected, a single, muddy footprint stamped in the dust just inside the door. I froze. The print was too big for any forest animal, the shape unmistakably human. I still can't explain it. My fingers trembled as I reached for the flashlight on the bedside table, switching it on with a harsh buzz. The beam cut through the dark, illuminating the floor. Another print appeared, then another, faint encircling the cabin in an odd, looping pattern. Someone had been there. Someone had come close enough to leave proof. I swallowed hard, trying to steady my racing thoughts. Maybe it was a hunter or a neighbor checking on the cabin. I hadn't seen any signs of habitation nearby, but I couldn't be sure. Still, the idea that someone had been watching me for days, without my knowledge, made a cold knot form in my stomach. Sleep didn't come back. Instead, I sat by the window until dawn, the forest outside waking slowly with birdsong and the rustle of leaves. I told myself to call someone, maybe the local ranger's office, but there was no reliable cell signal here. I felt stranded, caught between relief that the intruder hadn't forced their way in and a growing unease that this was only the beginning. The next morning, I found other things missing. My pack of matches was gone. So was the small jar of sugar I'd set on the counter. I checked the shelves twice, hoping I'd just misplaced them. But no! The space where they'd been sat oddly empty, too deliberate to be accidental. I paced the cabin, listening. Every snap of a twig beyond the walls made me jump. Every distant call of a bird sounded like a warning. The sunlight through the window no longer felt warm. It felt exposed, like being watched through a screen. I'm not usually this jumpy. I'm not easily rattled. But the silence around me had started to thicken, like fog rolling in off the forest floor. It pressed against my skin, settled in my bones. By midday, I decided to inspect the perimeter. The ground was soft from last night's rain, perfect for footprints. I crouched and scanned the earth, heart hammering as I traced the muddy circles around the cabin. They were fresh, the edges still sharp. Whoever had been here wasn't just passing through. They'd stayed close, moving in patterns that felt almost deliberate. I wondered if I should leave. I thought about packing up, driving back to the noise and the clutter of the city. But part of me resisted. This place was supposed to be a refuge, a break from everything that chased me daily. Was I imagining it? Overreacting? I tried to convince myself that the forest was just alive in its own way, alive and unpredictable. Maybe it was my imagination twisting the shadows and sounds into something sinister. I know how that sounds. I've been alone before. I've felt the quiet press in and make the world seem bigger than it is. But then, as I turned to head back inside, I caught the faintest hint of a scent, something musky and earthy, like damp leather mixed with pine sap. It wasn't unpleasant, but it wasn't natural either. It made the hairs on my neck rise. I glanced over my shoulder. Nothing. Just trees. Just the forest watching. That night, I left the porch light on. I sat by the window with the curtains pulled back, watching the darkness beyond the glass. The moon was a pale sliver, barely enough to light the path, but I could see the outlines of the trees and, just beyond, the faintest movement. A shadow shifted. I blinked. It was gone. Maybe a trick of the light. Maybe I was tired. Or maybe someone was out there. Watching. Waiting. Silence. Complete silence. And then, a slow, deliberate knock on the door. The knock came again, slow and measured, like a deliberate tapping on a hollow tree. I didn't answer. I couldn't. Instead, I pulled the curtains closed, the fabric rustling louder than I wanted, and backed away from the window. My hands trembled as I locked the door, the old latch clicking into place. My eyes darted toward the shadows pooling in the corners of the room, with its faint smell of dust and decay. Silence pressed in again, thick and suffocating. I could taste it, bitter and metallic. I sat on the edge of the couch, fingers tapping against the rough wool of my jacket. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, probably a raccoon, or some kid playing a prank. But the scent, the footprints I found earlier circling the cabin, the missing items, all those small, deliberate changes, they told a different story. Someone had been out there, watching me, knowing I was alone. I forced myself to stand and move toward the kitchen. The old wooden floorboards creaked underfoot. I opened the cupboard where I'd left my small stash of food and supplies, checking that everything was still there. A can of beans was missing. Not just misplaced, gone. I ran my fingers along the shelf, looking for any sign of disturbance. Nothing else seemed disturbed, but that absence gnawed at me. I grabbed a flashlight and stepped outside, the night air cold and sharp against my skin. The moon was hidden behind thick clouds, leaving the forest darker than I expected. I scanned the perimeter of the cabin, flashlight beam cutting through the blackness. The footprints from earlier were still there, faint but unmistakable, circling the building in a slow, patient loop. They were fresh, the soil hadn't dried since I first noticed them. My breath came out in visible puffs as I crouched to examine the prints. They were oddly spaced, almost too careful, like the person was trying not to make noise or be seen. I traced the outline with a finger, feeling the cold earth crumble beneath. The thought of someone moving so close, so deliberately, made my skin crawl. I wanted to call out, to yell, but the quiet was too thick, too alive. I walked the edge of the cabin again, the flashlight beam catching on something near the back porch. A small scrap of fabric caught on a nail, threadbare and stained. I pulled it free with a quiet snap. It smelled faintly of sweat and earth, a human smell that didn't belong here. My mind raced through possibilities. How long had they been here? How many times had they circled this place without me noticing? Back inside, I locked every window, double-checked the door, then sat down at the kitchen table with the scrap of fabric in my hand. I traced the frayed edges, feeling a prickling urge to understand, to unravel the mystery. The scent was stronger now, almost pungent. I closed my eyes and breathed it in again. A distant dog barked, sharp, urgent, breaking the silence. The sound was oddly comforting, a reminder there was life beyond this suffocating bubble of threat. Or was it a warning? I couldn't tell. I rubbed my temples, trying to think clearly. I needed a plan. I pulled out my phone, but the screen showed no signal. No surprise there. I'd known this was a remote spot, but the isolation suddenly felt like a trap. I tried to remember every detail from the past few days. The missing items, the footprints, the faint smell, the knock. It was all connected. Someone was testing me, pushing boundaries, seeing how far they could go. I needed to know more. I couldn't just sit and wait. The next morning, light spilled in through the curtains, but I barely noticed. I woke early, the memory of last night's knock still vivid. I dressed quickly and stepped outside, the air crisp and cold, smelling of pine needles and damp earth. The forest was quiet, almost too quiet. No birdsong, no rustling leaves. Just an uneasy stillness. I started walking the trail toward the creek, hoping for some distraction, some normalcy. But my eyes kept darting to the underbrush, scanning for any sign of movement. The forest felt different today, watchful, patient. I wondered if I was changing too, becoming more alert, more paranoid. Halfway down the path, I spotted something unfamiliar, a small, roughly fashioned cairn of stone stacked near a tree. It looked deliberate, like a marker. I approached cautiously, noticing a piece of paper tucked beneath the stones. I pulled it free, my hand shaking just slightly. The paper was folded, worn at the edges. I unfolded it slowly. Written in neat, careful handwriting was a single sentence, "You're not alone." A chill ran down my spine. I looked around, heart pounding. The forest seemed to close in, the trees standing like silent sentinels. Who had left a note? How long had they been watching me? I stuffed the note into my pocket and hurried back to the cabin, my thoughts racing. I needed to reach out, to tell someone, but the phone was useless. I thought about calling the ranger station, but even if I could get through, would they believe me? Back inside, I locked the door behind me and double-checked the windows. The sense of being watched was overwhelming now, a constant pressure at the back of my mind. I paced the room, running through everything I'd seen, heard, and smelled. Then, I noticed something high on the kitchen counter, a small pile of pine needles, carefully arranged in a rough circle. I hadn't put them there. I never would have. My breath caught. Whoever was out there, whoever was watching me, was no longer content to hide. They were playing a game, a slow, deliberate game of cat and mouse. The stakes were rising, and I was the only player who didn't know the rules. I sat down heavily, trying to steady my breathing. I thought about the note, the footprints, the missing can of beans. I thought about the knock on the door and the scrap of fabric. I thought about the person up there, just beyond the trees, waiting. And I knew I had to find out who. Before I could plan anything else, a sudden sound came from outside, something sharp and deliberate, like a branch snapping underfoot. I froze, every muscle tight. The forest was quiet again, but I knew better now. Quiet wasn't safe. I moved to the window, peering into the dark. A figure stood just at the edge of the porch lights, a silhouette blending with the shadows. I blinked, and the figure was gone. Silence. Complete silence. But the game had changed, and I wasn't sure I wanted to keep playing. The night stretched on, thick and unyielding. I pulled back, heart hammering so hard it felt like a fist inside my ribs. This wasn't just some random trespasser. Whoever it was knew the cabin, knew me. The footprints, the missing beans, the note, all pieces of a puzzle I hadn't even realized I was trying to solve. Now, I was part of their game, and I was losing. I wiped the glass with the back of my hand and stepped away, but the uneasy weight in my chest didn't lift. The porch light flickered, a weak pulse against the dark. I glanced at the door. It was locked, the deadbolt engaged. Still, I didn't feel any safer. I tried to think. What did they want? Why here? Why me? The cabin had been my refuge, my escape from the noise, the crowds, the endless chatter of city life. Instead, it was turning into a cage. Every creak in the floor, every rustle outside was a silent intrusion. I moved back to the kitchen, trying to focus on something mundane. The missing can of beans nagged at me, small but deliberate. Someone had been inside, rifling through my things, watching my routines. I opened the cabinet again, checking the shelves systematically. A half-empty box of matches was gone. So was my pack of instant coffee. Nothing else seemed disturbed, but the message was clear. They were close. Too close. My phone sat on the counter, screen cracked from an earlier mishap. No signal. I'd known that before coming out here, but now it felt like a curse. No way to call for help, no way to warn anyone. Just me, the cabin, and whoever was out there. I paced, hands twitching at my sides. The silence pressed in until it felt like it could snap my skin. Then, a faint tapping, soft but sharp, came from the back window. My breath caught. I moved toward it cautiously, heart in my throat. The window was locked, but the screen was torn, the mesh dangling like a broken net. Fresh footprints in the dirt beneath it. They circled the house again, smaller this time, like the person was pacing or waiting. I crouched down to examine them. Not just footprints, there were drag marks too, faint but definite, as if something had been pulled or carried around the perimeter. A shiver ran down my spine. It wasn't just watching anymore. They were probing, testing boundaries, seeing how far they could push. I was no longer an observer in this game, I was the target. I backed away slowly, my eyes darting to the far side of the cabin where the woods grew thicker, darker. A crunch of dead leaves, the snap of a twig. Someone was out there, just beyond what the porch light could reach. Waiting, watching, planning. I needed to know more. I had to find out who, if only to convince myself I wasn't losing my grip on reality. So, I grabbed the flashlight from the kitchen drawer, its beam shaky in my unsteady hands, and stepped outside. The air was cold and tasted faintly of pine and damp earth. The beam swept across the yard. Footprints led away from the back window, circling the cabin like a slow, deliberate spiral. They stopped abruptly at the edge of the trees. I followed, stepping carefully over roots and moss. The forest swallowed the light quickly, the beam flickering as branches swayed above. A sudden rustle to my left made me freeze. My breath hitched, chest tight. "Hello?" I called, voice low but steady. "Who's there?" No answer. Just a whisper of wind and the distant call of an owl. A dog barked far off, sharp and sudden, cutting through the night. Then I saw it, something caught on a branch, fluttering in the breeze. A piece of fabric, torn and stained. It was the same color as the scrap I'd found earlier on the porch. My fingers trembled as I reached out, brushing it gently. The rough texture of the cloth, the frayed edges, it was real, tangible. A sign that they had been close, too close. My mind raced. Could I turn back now? No! The note, the footprints, the missing supplies, it was clear I couldn't leave this behind. I was committed, whether I liked it or not. I took a deep breath, trying to steady the pounding in my ears. The forest was alive with sounds I had never noticed before, the snap of twigs, the rustle of leaves, the distant buzz of insects. But beneath it all, something darker, quieter. The feeling of eyes on me. I stepped back toward the cabin, but the beam of my flashlight caught something half buried in the dirt near the tree line. A small object, metallic and glinting faintly. I knelt down and pulled it free. A key. Old, tarnished, and unlike any key I'd seen before. I turned it over in my hand, the cold metal slick against my palm. What door could this possibly open? Suddenly, a noise behind me. Quick, deliberate footsteps breaking through the underbrush. My heart slammed. I spun around, flashlight swinging wildly. Nothing there. Or maybe someone just out of sight. I swallowed hard, the taste of fear bitter on my tongue. I couldn't run, not now, not after finding this. The key was a challenge, an invitation. Whoever was watching me, whoever had been stalking the edges of my sanctuary, wanted me to find it. I slipped the key into my pocket and hurried back inside, locking the door behind me with trembling hands. Every shadow in the cabin seemed to stretch, reaching toward me. The air was thick, heavy with anticipation. I sat down at the table, the key cold against my thigh. I knew, deep down, that this was the point of no return. There was no going back to the quiet isolation I'd hoped for. The game had changed, and the rules were mine to discover or to lose. Outside, the forest waited. Silent. Watching. Patient. The key burned a cold weight in my pocket, pressing against my thigh like a promise or a threat. I tried to steady my breath, but it rattled uneven in my chest. The footsteps from before echoed still, though I knew they were gone. Or maybe not. The thought sent a sharp chill skittering down my spine. I wasn't sure which was worse, knowing someone had been watching me or not knowing who or why. I glanced around the cabin, eyes tracing the familiar shapes, the cracked window pane, the chipped paint on the doorframe, the faded map pinned crookedly on the wall. Nothing seemed out of place. Yet I knew better. There were missing items. Footprints circling the house like a slow, patient predator. Small, deliberate changes I caught only because I was already on edge. The key felt colder now. I pulled it out, turning it over in my hand. The metal was dull, scratched, and oddly heavy for its size. I had no idea what lock it belonged to, but it was the only clue I had. Whoever left it wanted me to find it. Wanted me to open something. To cross a line. My fingers trembled as I stood and moved toward the back of the cabin, where the old storage closet sat. I'd barely noticed it before, just a cramped space full of dusty boxes and cobwebs. The door was padlocked, rusted shut. No match for this key, I hoped. Sliding it into the lock, I felt a surge of relief when it clicked open on the first try. Inside, the air was stale, smelling of damp wood and forgotten years. I flicked on my flashlight, the beam cutting through the gloom. Shelves lined the walls, cluttered with tools, cans of paint, a coil of rope. But what caught my eye was a small, battered notebook lying on the floor, its cover cracked and faded. I picked it up with care, flipping through pages filled with cramped handwriting. At first, it was just notes, dates, observations about the weather, animal sightings. Then the entries grew darker, more erratic. Mentions of me. Of my routines. What I ate, when I slept, how I moved through the cabin. My skin prickled. Someone had been keeping track of me. For days, maybe weeks. I sank back onto the floor, the notebook heavy in my lap. The words blurred as my mind raced. Why? What did they want? Was this a game? A warning? Or something worse? A sudden noise made me freeze. A soft scrape at the window, like nails striking lightly against glass. My breath caught. I spun toward the sound, flashlight beam slicing the shadows. Nothing. Just the wind or a branch brushing against the pane. I told myself that firmly, but my hands betrayed me, shaking as I lowered the light. I couldn't stay here. Not like this. But where could I go? The forest was a maze, endless and unforgiving. The cabin was my only shelter, but it had become a cage. I closed the notebook, sliding it into my jacket pocket. If this was a challenge, I had to meet it head on. I had to find whoever was watching me. To understand what they wanted. To end this. The night stretched long and silent. I sat by the window, eyes straining to catch any movement among the trees. My senses sharpened, every rustle a potential threat, every shadow a lurking presence. Hours passed. The moon slid across the sky, pale and cold. Then, just as exhaustion began to pull at my eyelids, I saw a faint glimmer, a flash of movement beyond the tree line. Someone was there. Watching. I stood quickly, heart hammering. Who's there? My voice cracked, brittle in the stillness. No answer. Just the whisper of the wind through the pines. I clenched my fists, the taste of fear bitter and sharp. I wasn't sure how much longer I could keep this up. How long before the silence broke and the watcher stepped out of the shadows? The forest waited. I was trapped in the dark, the key heavy in my pocket, the notebook in my hand, and the weight of unseen eyes pressing down on me like a storm about to break. A twig snapped somewhere to my left, crisp and sudden, slicing through the thick quiet like an item. I froze, breath hitching, every muscle taut as wire. The shadows seemed to pulse, stretching and shrinking with the faint glow of the moon. My fingers tightened around the notebook's spine, the leather cover rough against my palm, grounding me in this moment. I forced myself to take a slow, steady breath, willing my legs to move. One step forward, then another. The underbrush crunched softly beneath my boots as I edged toward the direction of the sound, heart hammering in time with each cautious footfall. The key, cold and unfamiliar, pressed into my pocket, a reminder of why I was here, why I couldn't turn back now. Suddenly, a flicker of movement, barely more than a shadow, darted between the trees ahead. I stopped dead, eyes scanning desperately. The forest seemed endless, a maze of trunks and branches that swallowed shapes whole. The watcher was close. I could feel it, a presence lingering just beyond sight, patient and hungry. My fingers trembled as I flipped open the notebook, searching for something, anything that might tell me what to do next. The worn pages whispered secrets in the moonlight, cryptic notes and half-remembered warnings. Then I found it, a sketch of this very forest, a hidden path marked with a faint red line that twisted deeper into the darkness. Swallowing a rising panic, I made a decision. If I was going to be hunted, I would hunt back. Steeling myself, I stepped off the beaten trail, following the fragile thread of the map into the unknown, hoping the watcher wouldn't be fast enough to catch me. I woke before dawn, pulled from restless sleep by a faint scratching sound, like fingernails dragging across dry bark. The cabin was quiet otherwise, the kind of quiet that presses against your ears, waiting. I lay still, eyes adjusted to the dim, and listened. Nothing more. Just the rhythmic tapping, slow and deliberate, somewhere just outside the window. My breath caught. I wanted to tell myself it was a squirrel or a branch brushing the glass. I even tried, whispering, "It's nothing." But the sound didn't stop. I slipped out of bed and padded across the wooden floor, the old boards creaking under my weight. The air was cold, sharper than the day before, biting at my skin through the thin cotton of my shirt. My fingers trembled as I pulled the curtain aside. The forest looked black and empty, but there it was, a set of footprints, small and cautious, circling the cabin's perimeter. The prints were fresh, the edges still crisp in the damp earth. I stared at them, heart pounding, the silence growing heavy around me. For days, someone had been here, watching, moving around my refuge like a ghost, unseen, unheard until now. I swallowed hard, tasted the metallic tang of fear rising in my mouth. I didn't want to believe it. Maybe it was an animal. But the pattern was too precise. The footprints formed a deliberate loop, as if someone was mapping the house, learning its shape by footfall. I traced the line with my eyes, noticing breaks where the prints suddenly disappeared, only to reappear on the other side. Someone had been careful, moving quietly, almost like they didn't want to be found. I pulled the curtain back, heart hammering. The forest was still. No movement. No shadow. I closed the window and leaned against the cold glass, feeling the rough wood of the frame under my palms. My breath fogged the pain. I pressed my face close, searching. The rising sun had begun to stain the sky a pale orange, but the trees remained dark sentinels. Later, as the day brightened, I tried to focus on ordinary tasks. The coffee pot sputtered and hissed, filling the cabin with a bitter, burnt smell. I chopped vegetables with slow, deliberate strokes, but every sound, the dull thud of the item, the scrape of metal against wood felt amplified, echoing in the tight space like a warning. I kept glancing toward the windows, half expecting to catch a glimpse of movement. At one point, I noticed the kitchen towel was missing, replaced by a smaller, rougher rag I didn't recognize. My pulse quickened. I searched the cabin, checking drawers and shelves. Nothing else seemed out of place. A misplaced rag. That was all. But the idea that someone had been inside, touching my things, rearranging the smallest details, it made the walls close in tighter. I sat down heavily on the worn couch, the fabric prickling my skin. The cabin smelled of pine and damp wood, but beneath that, a faint, unfamiliar scent lingered, something earthy, like wet soil mixed with something metallic. I breathed it in, trying to place it, but it slipped away before I could. That afternoon, the sun was high and hot, but the cabin felt colder. Shadows pulled in the corners, stretching like fingers. I closed the blinds halfway, hoping to block the view outside without shutting out the light. I told myself I was just being paranoid, but the tension settled in my chest like a stone. I couldn't shake the feeling that the walls were watching me back. Around 5, I heard footsteps, soft, deliberate, circling the house again. Not outside, but just beyond the thin wooden walls. My pulse sped up. I moved to the door and pressed my ear against the grainy surface. The steps stopped. Silence. Then a faint tapping on the porch railing. A slow, steady rhythm. I wanted to call out, to say, "Who's there?" but my voice caught in my throat. Instead, I whispered, "I know you're there." The tapping stopped. The silence was so complete it nearly drowned out my own heartbeat. I spent the next hour pacing, running my hands along the walls, feeling for any sign of a hidden entrance. Nothing. The cabin was old but solid, no cracks or gaps big enough for a person to slip through unnoticed. And yet, someone had been here, moving around me like a shadow. When night fell, the forest outside transformed. The wind picked up, rattling the loose shutters, carrying distant animal calls that sounded like cries or warnings. I lit every lamp, filling the rooms with a warm glow. The flickering flames cast long, jittery shadows that danced on the wooden walls, twisting into shapes that made my skin crawl. I sat by the window, watching the dark woods. The moon was thin, a sliver barely lighting the path. Then I saw it, a figure, standing just beyond the tree line. Still. Watching. The outline was vague, blurred by distance and shadow, but unmistakably human. I swallowed the lump rising in my throat and forced myself to speak. "Why are you here?" The voice came out barely audible, rough and cracked. The figure didn't move. Didn't respond. Then, slowly, it turned and disappeared into the darkness. I closed the window, locking every latch. The cabin was sealed tight, but I knew it was a fragile barrier against the unknown outside. Against the watcher. I sat back, exhausted, the weight of isolation pressing down. Days of silence, broken only by small, deliberate incursions into my space. Someone had been here, close enough to touch my life, but distant enough to remain unseen. The thought made my hands shake. That night, sleep was elusive. Every creak and groan of the cabin sounded like footsteps echoing through the halls. I kept the lamps burning low, the flickering light a thin shield against the darkness pressing in on all sides. Morning came slowly. I stepped outside, the cold air a sharp slap against my face. The footprints were gone. No sign of anyone. The forest was still. The watcher had vanished, as quietly as they had arrived. I packed my things methodically, my movements steady despite the knot in my stomach. The cabin, my refuge, was no longer safe. It was a cage built around me by fear and silence. As I locked the door behind me, I looked back once, the trees standing like silent sentinels against the pale sky. I didn't know who had been watching, or why. Maybe it was curiosity, or something darker. But the forest held its secrets close, and I was no longer a part of them. Walking toward the narrow dirt road, I felt the weight of every step. Alone, yes, but now free. The watcher was gone. The silence lifted. And though the fear lingered, it no longer had a home in that cabin. I didn't look back again. Story 2 of Voices Within, Unseen Minds Invade. It started the morning I ordered coffee at the corner cafe, a place I'd visited every weekday for the last 3 years. "Your usual?" I said, and the words felt wrong, like a mask stretched too tight across my face. The cafe smelled of burnt espresso and old wood, the air, cold and heavy with silence thick with the low murmur of conversations and the faint clinking of porcelain cups. Outside, the sky was a dull gray, the kind of day that made you want to stay indoors, hidden from everything. I blinked at my reflection in the glass counter. My own face stared back, but the voice that had spoken was not mine. It was hers. The barista's. A flicker of heat rose in my cheeks. I tried again, this time in my own voice, but it wavered, shaky, as if I was trying to remember something I'd forgotten. She looked at me, eyebrows raised, and I forced a laugh. "Guess I'm not awake yet," I said, my voice cracking on the last word. She didn't say anything, just handed over the coffee. I took it, the warmth of the cup seeping into my palms, grounding me, or so I hoped. Walking down the street, the city felt different, as if the usual hum was slightly off-key. The chatter from the market stall smelled of fresh bread and spilled fruit juice, mixed with something metallic, faint and unsettling. I pressed the cup to my lips, tasting the bitterness, the slight burnt edge that always made me grimace. I told myself it was just fatigue, or maybe the leftover stress from last night's restless sleep. But deep down, I knew it was something else. By noon, the voice episodes had multiplied. At the grocery store, the cashier's tone slipped into my words while I asked about the price of apples. It wasn't just mimicry anymore, it was like fragments of their memories, their mannerisms, bleeding into me without warning. I caught myself staring blankly at the shelves, a sudden rush of someone else's thoughts crowding my mind, shoppers, strangers, people I'd never met but whose lives I was suddenly intruding upon. A woman's laughter echoed in my head, sharp and brittle, a man's quiet worry about a missed appointment. They weren't mine, but they felt as vivid as my own. When I got home, the silence was supposed to be a relief. Instead, it was heavy, pressing against the walls of my small apartment like a thick fog. The faint buzzing of the refrigerator was a constant, and the faint smell of detergent clung to the air. I sank into the worn fabric of my couch, the springs creaking under me. I tried to focus on a book, but the words on the page blurred. Then, another voice slipped through, this time, a deep, slow drawl that wasn't mine. It whispered memories of a man I didn't know, someone who had sat in this very room, maybe years ago. His secrets, his regrets, spilled into my mind without permission. I swallowed hard, the taste of cold coffee lingering at the back of my throat. My hands trembled, fingers curling into fists against the fabric of the couch. Was I losing my mind? Or was this something worse? A sudden knock at the door startled me. My breath caught in my chest. I wasn't expecting anyone. "Hello?" I called, voice unsteady, trying to sound normal. No answer. Just the echo of my words bouncing back. I moved to the peephole and looked out. The hallway was empty. A flickering light bulb overhead cast long, uneven shadows along the walls. Somewhere down the hall, a dog barked twice, sharp and distant. My pulse quickened. I leaned closer, trying to catch any sound, any movement, but there was nothing. Nothing but silence. Complete silence. I backed away and locked the door again, sliding the bolt into place. The apartment felt colder suddenly, the air thinner. I sank back onto the couch, the weight of the day settling heavily on my chest. I told myself to call someone, a doctor maybe. But who would understand? How do you explain that your own voice has become a stranger's? That memories not your own invade your mind without warning? I didn't want to think about it. Not yet. Outside, the city carried on unaware, indifferent. The street lamps flickered on, casting pools of yellow light that shimmered on the wet pavement. I watched a stray cat slip through a puddle, its fur matted and damp. And then, just as I was about to close my eyes, the voice returned. Not mine. Not any voice I'd heard before. Soft. Low. Urgent. Don't trust them. The words echoed in my mind, chilling and clear. I sat up straight, every hair on my arm standing on end. There was no one there. No one at all. But the warning stayed with me, like an itch beneath my skin I couldn't scratch. That night, I didn't sleep. Instead, I paced the room, the shadows stretching and shrinking with each flicker of the streetlight outside. Questions tumbled through my mind. Who were they? What danger was I supposed to avoid? The city, usually a blur of noise and motion, felt suffocatingly silent, as if it were holding its breath alongside me. My phone buzzed on the table, a message from an unknown number. Be careful who you trust. My pulse quickened. This wasn't a coincidence. Something was unfolding, and I was right in the middle of it. I pocketed the phone and glanced toward the window, where a figure melted into the darkness, watching. The night didn't get any quieter. I pulled my phone out, the screen lighting up the room in a cold blue glow. The message from the unknown number sat there, mocking me. Be careful who you trust. I stared at it for a long moment, thumb hovering over the reply button. Part of me wanted to ask who they were, how they knew me, but the other part, maybe the smarter part, told me silence was safer. I deleted the message instead, heart thudding in my chest. Sleep wasn't coming. Not tonight. By early morning, exhaustion clawed at my eyelids, but I kept pacing. I tried to focus on something real, the faint smell of damp concrete leaking through the cracked window, the uneven rhythm of my shallow breathing. It was all I could cling to when my own voice betrayed me again. I was brushing my teeth when it happened, a sudden shift in tone, words I hadn't chosen slipping out with someone else's accent, someone else's hesitation. I'm sorry, I whispered to the mirror, feeling the strange warmth of tears I wasn't sure were mine. Who are you? The reflection stared back, neutral, but my mind raced. This wasn't just mimicry anymore. It was deeper. Memories, fragments of places I'd never visited, feelings that weren't mine but felt embedded in my skin. I needed a plan. The next morning, I made my way to the public library, hoping the bright, crowded space would steady me. The familiar rustle of pages and the low murmur of readers were a balm, though my hands still shook as I signed in at the front desk. I sat at one of the long tables by a window, sunlight filtering through dusty blinds and casting striped shadows across my notes. I'd started jotting down everything: voices, phrases, memories that slipped into my mind unbidden. Patterns emerged. The voices weren't random. They belonged to people connected by geography, time, or circumstance. One voice led to another, like a twisted chain of secrets. I pulled up news archives on the library's computers. The first name that screamed at me was Marion Ellis. The voice I heard last night, the one that warned me, matched the tone I'd unconsciously echoed earlier that morning. Marion Ellis was a woman who had disappeared 6 months ago, last seen near the neighborhood where I live now. The article was brief, unremarkable at first glance, a missing persons notice, a few lines about a woman, mid-30s, no known enemies, vanished without a trace. But something about it felt off. The language was sterile, almost dismissive. I printed the article, the paper crackling under my fingers. I needed to know more. If Marion's voice was in my head, maybe she was trying to tell me something. I could almost hear her desperation beneath the words, like a faint pulse begging for attention. I spent hours combing through other records, local forums, missing persons databases, obituaries, anything that might connect the dots. The more I found, the heavier the weight in my chest grew. There were others, too many others, whose voices I recognized now, each linked to a disappearance, a secret, a lie buried beneath polite society's surface. By late afternoon, the library was nearly empty. The quiet felt oppressive, as if the walls themselves held their breath. When I packed up my things, the flicker of unease returned. I glanced out the window and caught a glimpse of movement, a shadow shifting behind a tree across the street. No one should have been there. Back home, I tried to shake off the feeling of being watched. The streetlight flickered again, the same uneven rhythm as last night. I locked the door behind me and leaned against it, the cool metal pressing into my back. My phone buzzed once more. Another message. This time from the same unknown number. They're closer than you think. I dropped the phone onto the counter, the screen darkening. The room suddenly felt smaller, the air thick and hard to breathe. I ran my hands over my face, trying to ground myself. My reflection in the window looked tired, worn down by something I couldn't name but could no longer ignore. The voices had started as a curiosity, a strange quirk. Now they were a warning. And somewhere in the tangled mess of memories and warnings, I realized I was no longer just a bystander. I wasn't safe. The next day, I met with Dr. Harper, my neurologist, hoping she could explain the creeping chaos inside my head. Her office was sterile, the faint scent of rubbing alcohol and old paper filling the air. She listened patiently as I described the voices, the memories that weren't mine, the warnings that felt urgent and real. Her face tightened when I mentioned the voices warning me not to trust certain people. It's not unusual for patients with your condition to experience auditory hallucinations, she said carefully. But your case is more complex. I nodded, biting my lip. It's like I'm channeling them. Their fears, their secrets. Dr. Harper's eyes darkened. Memory and identity are fragile things. Your brain is trying to make sense of conflicting signals, but sometimes that creates shadows where none should be. I wanted to ask if she believed me, but the words stuck in my throat. Instead, I pressed, what if those shadows are real? She leaned back, fingers interlaced. Sometimes, the mind sees threats that aren't there. But sometimes, it senses danger before the conscious mind can. Her answer didn't bring relief. If anything, it made the night's warnings feel more ominous, more tangible. That evening, as I sat by the window, the city's lawn washing over me, I tried to focus on the sounds outside, the distant bark of a dog, the crunch of tires on gravel, the occasional burst of laughter from a passing group. But beneath it all, there was an undercurrent I couldn't shake. A presence. I turned sharply when the voice came again, softer this time, barely a whisper. They're watching the building across from you. I froze. My eyes darted to the window opposite mine, the darkened shape of the old apartment block looming like a silent sentinel. Through the cracked blinds, I thought I saw a flicker of movement, a silhouette retreating. I wanted to convince myself it was a trick of the light, or my own exhaustion playing games. But the cold sweat on my palms told a different story. I wasn't imagining it. Suddenly, my phone buzzed again. Another message. Find the truth before they find you. And then, the lights went out. Silence. Complete silence. The shadows closed in. The darkness pressed in like a living thing, thick and suffocating. I didn't move for several minutes, pinned in place by a sudden weight I couldn't name. The silhouette across the street haunted me just for a second, then gone. Had I seen it at all? My mind didn't want to admit the answer. No, I wasn't hallucinating. Not this time. The old apartment block sat like a dark monument, windows empty, eyes staring back. I thought about calling the police, but what would I say? Some shadow watching me? The flicker of a figure? They'd probably think I was nuts, or worse, a troublemaker. Besides, the voice on my phone, the one that had been threading through my head all week, had warned me. They're watching. Who were they? And why? My fingers hovered over the screen, hesitating before I typed a reply. I didn't know who to reach out to, not yet. The rational part of me wanted to disconnect, to pretend none of this was real. But that voice, the one that wasn't mine but also somehow was, kept replaying snippets of memories that weren't mine, secrets not meant for me. I pressed the power button. The lights stayed off. I sat back, heart hammering like a trapped animal's. The air smelled of faint ozone and something else I couldn't place, old paper, maybe, or dust disturbed after years of neglect. The window pane felt cold against my cheek when I leaned in to peer outside again. A faint scuffing sound caught my attention. From across the street, a shadow moved again, slower this time. Not retreating but lingering. Watching me. I blinked hard. My pulse thudded painfully in my ears. Then, the power flickered back on. The room snapped into harsh fluorescent light, and the silence shattered like glass. My phone buzzed again. "You have no choice now." The text wasn't a threat. It was a fact. I felt the cold slide down my spine. No choice. No turning back. Morning came too quickly. The sun pushed weakly through grimy blinds, dust motes floating like tiny ghosts in the stale air. I woke with a dry mouth and a headache that throbbed behind my eyes. The memory of last night clawed at me. The darkness, the silhouette, the messages. The warning. I paced the cramped room, my feet making soft thuds on the threadbare carpet. I was tethered to this apartment now, trapped by whatever unseen force had pulled me in. I pulled my coat tighter around me and stepped outside. The street was quiet, the usual clatter of city life muted under a heavy gray sky. Across from me, the old apartment block loomed, windows dark and unwelcoming. I crossed the street, each step deliberate, my eyes scanning the building's cracked facade. A door to the side was slightly ajar. I hadn't noticed it before. The hinges creaked softly as I pushed it open, the smell of mildew and old wood washing over me. Inside, the air was cooler, damp against my skin. I hesitated, then stepped inside. The hallway was narrow and dimly lit, peeling paint curling away like dead skin. The faint echo of footsteps bounced off the walls of mine, or someone else's. I couldn't tell. I wanted to turn back, but the pull was too strong. At the end of the hall, a door stood slightly open. A flicker of movement inside. I pressed my ear to the cool wood. Voices. Low, urgent. I caught fragments, names, places, plans. Something about control and exposure. A name I recognized from the memories that weren't mine. The voice wasn't just mimicking anymore, it was revealing. The edges of my own identity blurring into someone else's. Suddenly, the door swung open. A woman, mid-30s, sharp eyes like broken glass, stared at me. Her mouth moved, but the words came out in my own voice. "Who are you?" I asked, though the voice was hers. She blinked, confusion flickering. Then recognition. "You shouldn't be here," she said. Her voice trembled, but there was steel beneath. "Neither should you," I replied, voice cracking. "What is this place?" She glanced over her shoulder, then back at me. "A trap." The words settled between us like a stone. I wanted to back away, but my legs refused. My hands trembled, fingers curling into fists. The memories I'd been stealing, the lives I'd been borrowing, weren't just glitches in my brain. They were warnings. Pieces of a puzzle I was only beginning to see. "This is bigger than you think," she said, eyes narrowing. "And you're already too deep." I swallowed hard. Too deep how? Her gaze pierced me. They're not just watching. They're controlling. And once you cross this line, there's no going back. The air thickened, heavy with meaning. I realized then that whatever this rare disorder was, it had entangled me in something I couldn't untangle myself from. The city outside, the shadows, the voices, they weren't random. They were a web. And I was caught in the center. I wanted to run, to escape this suffocating spiral. But the truth was clear. I had already lost that choice. The woman stepped closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. If you want to survive, you'll have to play their game. I nodded slowly, a cold resolve settling over the tremors. No more running. No more hiding. I was in it now. There was no turning back. And somewhere deep inside, the voice whispered again, soft, urgent. Find the truth. Before it finds you. The woman's words lingered like a heavy fog in the stale air of the grimy apartment. I nodded, though my hand shook slightly. Okay. What game? She didn't answer right away. Instead, she pulled a folded piece of paper from the inner pocket of her coat, the edges dog-eared and stained. The smell of damp ink and old paper hit me, sharp and unsettling. I took the paper, fingers brushing the rough texture, heart hammering. Tonight, she said softly, you're going to meet them. A knot formed in my stomach. Them. The people behind the voices, the memories that weren't mine but had become tangled inside my head. I wanted to ask who, but the words caught in my throat. Before I could protest, she turned and disappeared into the shadowed hallway. I stayed rooted to the spot, the weight of the paper burning in my palm. Outside, the city was alive with restless energy, the distant wail of sirens, the muted chatter of late-night pedestrians, the sharp clang of a garbage can lid somewhere down the alley. The air smelled of rain and exhaust, a bitter cocktail that made me wince. I unfolded the paper. The writing was cramped, hurried, but clear enough, an address, a time, and a single word scrawled beneath it, obey. Obey. The word twisted in my mind. Who was I supposed to obey? What choice did I even have? I shoved the paper into my pocket and forced myself up from the peeling couch. The floorboards groaned beneath my feet as I moved toward the door, the faint creak echoing like a warning. The street outside was slick with recent rain, the pavement reflecting the neon glow from a nearby diner sign. I pulled my coat tighter against the chill and started walking. My breath came out in shaky clouds as I tried to steady the chaos inside my head. The city felt different tonight. Thicker. Like the air was charged with something unseen but deeply wrong. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone following me. My voice flickered inside me, not my own, whispering fragments of memories that weren't mine, a woman's laughter, a man's sharp command, the quiet sobbing of a child. I blinked hard, trying to shake the voices loose, but they clung to me like shadows. The address led me to an old building tucked between a boarded-up storefront and a shuttered bookshop. The faded brick was cracked and stained, the windows dark except for a faint glow leaking from behind a heavy curtain. I hesitated at the door, my skin prickling with a sudden cold that had nothing to do with the night air. I could hear murmurs from inside, voices low and urgent, like a conversation I was meant to overhear but not join. A sharp rapping startled me. The door creaked open just a crack, revealing a pair of eyes, dark, assessing, and unblinking. "You're late," the woman said, voice low and clipped. I didn't know the time exactly," I stammered, my throat dry. She stepped back, motioning me inside with a flick of her wrist. The door shut behind me with a soft thud that sounded far too final. Inside, the room, with its faint smell of dust and decay, was dim, lit by a single lamp with a cracked shade that cast uneven shadows on peeling wallpaper. The air was thick with the scent of old wood and something metallic, like iron or blood. My stomach twisted unpleasantly. There were others here. I could sense them before I saw them, the faint shuffle of feet, the scrape of chairs, the low rumble of voices. They sat in a circle, faces shadowed, eyes flicking toward me as I entered. The woman who'd brought me here stepped forward. "Everyone, this is the one I told you about." A man with a lined face and cold eyes leaned forward. His voice was smooth, practiced, but carried an edge that made my skin prickle. "You've been hearing things, haven't you?" I nodded, swallowing a lump that had lodged in my throat. That's just the beginning, he said, lips curling into something like a smile. What you're experiencing isn't a disorder. It's a symptom. A connection. The word connection echoed in my mind, mingling with the voices that wouldn't stop. A memory flashed: a cramped office, a woman crying, papers scattered across a desk. Not mine, but terrifyingly vivid. Why me? I asked, voice barely a whisper. The woman from before leaned in, her gaze sharp. Because you're the key. The room seemed to shrink around me. My hands trembled, fingers curling into fists to stop them from shaking. Key to what? I demanded, voice louder than I wanted. To everything they want to hide, the man said. To the lies, the secrets buried beneath this city's surface. A cold sweat slicked my skin. The voices inside me surged, overlapping in a cacophony I couldn't control. A woman's voice, urgent and afraid, whispered in my ear, "Don't trust them." I turned sharply, but the faces around me were unreadable, neutral, expectant. "Who are you?" I asked, voice cracking. The woman smiled thinly. "We're the ones who know. And we need you." The weight of those words crushed me. Needed. Used. Expendable. Suddenly, the door slammed open behind me. A blast of cold air swept through the room, carrying the sharp scent of rain and something metallic again. My heart slammed against my ribs. A figure stepped inside, tall, broad-shouldered, face hidden in shadows. The room tensed, silence falling like a shroud. "You brought her?" the figure asked, voice low and dangerous. "Yes," the woman replied, stepping forward. "She's ready." The figure's eyes gleamed in the dim light, cold and calculating. Good. Because there's no turning back now. I wanted to step away, to run, but my feet felt rooted to the spot. The voices inside me surged to a fever pitch, fragments of memories flashing in blinding bursts, a locked drawer, a whispered conversation, the unmistakable scent of fear. My chest tightened until I could barely breathe. The woman glanced at me, her expression unreadable. "You're going to see what they hide." I swallowed hard, the taste of iron sharp on my tongue. The room closed in, the shadows thickening. And somewhere deep inside, a voice hissed, urgent and sharp, "Run. Run now." But I didn't move. I couldn't. Because I already knew. I was too far gone. The air was thick with silence, save for the faint hum of the overhead light flickering above me. The woman who'd brought me here, her face still unreadable, turned toward the far wall and pressed a button. A panel slid open, revealing a narrow staircase leading downward. The faint smell of damp concrete and something metallic rose from below. I swallowed hard, the dry scrape of my throat loud in the quiet. "Come," she said softly, but there was no invitation in her voice. Only command. My feet moved before I could stop them. Each step down was a slow surrender, the voices inside me growing louder, overlapping. Fragments of memories I had no right to own flared up like broken glass against my mind. A child's laugh, a man whispering threats, a woman's scream swallowed by the dark. They weren't mine, but they felt stitched to my skin now, impossible to peel away. At the bottom, the air, cold and heavy with silence, was colder. Fluorescent bulbs lined the ceiling, their harsh light casting long shadows against peeling paint and cracked floor tiles. The room ahead was small, cluttered with old filing cabinets and stacks of yellowing papers. The woman motioned towards a desk piled with documents and photographs. "Look," she said. I approached slowly, breathing in the musty scent of stale paper and dust. On the desk lay a folder marked with my name. I hesitated, fingers trembling as I opened it. Inside, a collection of photographs, notes, and official documents chronicled my life and, more disturbingly, the lives of others like me. People whose voices and memories I had unwittingly absorbed, some of whom had vanished without a trace. One photograph caught my eye, a smiling woman, her eyes bright but tired, standing next to a man whose face was blurred out. The image had a jagged tear across the corner, as if someone had tried to erase part of the story. A note scrawled beneath read, "Do not trust the shadows." I looked up, meeting the woman's gaze. "Why am I here?" I asked, voice barely above a whisper. She exhaled slowly. "Because you're the only one who can expose what they're hiding. But it's dangerous. They'll come after you." The cold knot in my stomach tightened. "Who are they?" She hesitated, then said, "People who want to control the truth. They've been watching you, tracking the voices you carry. They see you as a threat." I remembered the figure at the door, the one who spoke with such certainty, and the way his eyes gleamed with something I couldn't name. Power? Fear? A hunger for control? It chilled me more than the basement's dampness. "I don't want to be part of this," I admitted. "I just want to be myself." Her expression softened, but only for a moment. "You're not yourself anymore." "Not entirely. But maybe that's the point, you're more now." And that scares them. I closed the folder, the paper crackling in my hands. The voices inside me settled into a low murmur, no longer a chaos but a chorus, each one a thread woven into the fabric of my fractured identity. "Can I stop it?" I asked, though I wasn't sure what it truly meant anymore. She looked away, then nodded. "You can try, but you'll need help." The sound of footsteps echoed from above, sharp and deliberate. My heart hammered against my ribs. We both froze. "Hide," she whispered. I slipped behind a filing cabinet just as the basement door creaked open. The tall figure stepped inside, followed by another shadowy presence. Their voices were low, tense. "Did she come down?" the first asked. "No sign yet," the second replied. "Check the office." I held my breath, the rough metal of the cabinet biting into my palm. My skin prickled, every nerve screaming to flee, but my body locked in place. After what felt like an eternity, the footsteps retreated. The basement door thudded shut, the lock clicking into place. The woman exhaled sharply. "We don't have much time," she said. "You need to get out. Now." I nodded, heart still racing, and followed her up the stairs. Outside, the night air hit me like a wave, cold, sharp, and real. The city's distant hum was a strange comfort after the oppressive silence below. "Where do we go from here?" I asked. She looked at me, eyes steady. "Somewhere safe. Somewhere we can figure out what you're really carrying and how to use it." I glanced down at my hands. They felt the same but somehow different, charged, as if the memories and voices inside had altered more than just my mind. I wasn't just me anymore. I was every fractured piece stitched together, a mosaic of voices too loud to ignore. The next morning, I woke up in a small apartment she'd rented. Sunlight filtered weakly through smudged windows. For the first time in weeks, the voices quieted to a gentle hum, like distant thunder rolling across the sky. I could taste the bitterness of coffee on my tongue and the faint scent of rain lingering in the breeze. I sat on the edge of the bed, fingers tracing the worn fabric of the sheets, and wondered how much of me was left beneath the echoes. The woman was already awake, sifting through a pile of papers on the kitchen table. "They're looking for you," she said without looking up. "But we've got time to plan." I nodded, though a part of me wanted to retreat, to disappear into the anonymity I'd lost. "Do you ever wonder if this will end?" I asked quietly. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I used to. Now, I just hope it changes something. I understood that. Hope was fragile, but it was all I had left. Days passed, and I learned to navigate the cacophony inside me. The voices no longer overwhelmed but whispered guidance, memories offering clues like puzzle pieces falling into place. I started to reclaim my own story, even as I acknowledged the fragments of others I carried. It was unsettling, but also strangely grounding. One evening, as rain pattered against the window, I found myself speaking aloud, testing the boundaries of my fractured identity. "I'm still me," I said to the empty room. Or at least, something close. The words hung in the air, fragile yet defiant. The woman nodded from the doorway. That's a start. And maybe it was. Maybe the line between who I was and who I'd become would never be clear again. But I could live with that ambiguity. I had to. Because the truth was no longer just a secret hidden in shadows. It was inside me, tangled and raw. And I was learning, slowly, how to carry it without breaking. Outside, the city breathed on, unaware, relentless, alive. And so was I, changed, but still standing. Scared, but no longer silent. The voices would never leave. But neither would I. Story 3, Dimensional Freight, Haunting Cargo Routes. The highway stretched out in front of me like a thin gray ribbon, unspooling through the early morning fog. I checked the manifest again, although the list of cargo had already begun to needle at the back of my mind. It was supposed to be standard stuff, metal coils, packaged electronics, industrial plastics. That's what the dispatcher said, anyway. But the descriptions didn't quite match the labels on the crates. One shipment read dimension stabilizers, another quantum field regulators. I rubbed my eyes, sure I'd misread something. Maybe the new experimental routes had them using fancy jargon I wasn't supposed to understand. I don't mind a little mystery in my job. Keeps the hours from feeling like a grind. But something about this felt different, off. The air inside the truck smelled faintly of ozone and oil, with a hint of something floral I couldn't place. Lilies? No, that wasn't right. More like the scent of a cleaning product, too sharp to be natural. It's funny how smells can stick in your memory, even when you don't want them to. The radio crackled to life with a low buzz, and I reached over to adjust the dial. Static, mostly. Then a voice, flat, clipped, almost mechanical. Gateway 1 active. Proceed with caution. That was new. I'd never heard anything like it before on these runs. I twisted the volume down and glanced at the GPS screen. The next waypoint was marked by a pulsing blue icon labeled Gateway 1. A checkpoint, maybe, but nothing like the rest of the stops I'd made before. I shuffled through the paperwork again. The cargo manifest was official, stamped with a government seal I didn't recognize. The signatures were blurred, like someone had scribbled them in a hurry. The delivery address was a nondescript warehouse on the outskirts of town, but when I called the number listed, the line was dead. I tapped the horn twice, out of habit more than anything. The sound bounced off the empty buildings lining the highway, swallowed up by the morning mist. There was no one around, not even a dog barking in the distance or a bird stirring in the trees. Just the faint hum of the truck and my own breath, shallow and quiet. I told myself it was nothing. Just a new route, a different company, maybe some sloppy paperwork. It happens. But the air, cold and heavy with silence, had shifted somehow. The light filtering through the windshield was duller, the colors muted like a faded photograph. I pinched the bridge of my nose and caught a glimpse of the rearview mirror. The reflection was hazy, almost like fog had crept inside the glass. The road curved ahead, disappearing behind a thick grove of pines. I slowed the rig, scanning for any sign of the checkpoint. The trees looked normal enough, but the silence was oppressive. No rustle of leaves, no chirp of insects. I could smell damp earth and pine needles, but also something metallic, sharp, and biting. A shiver ran down my spine. I told myself to shake it off, but my hands trembled slightly on the wheel. The truck's dashboard lights flickered, momentarily dimming before steadying again. I looked down. The gauges all read normal. No warning lights. Nothing out of place. I pulled off the highway into a gravel lot surrounded by chain-link fencing topped with barbed wire. A lone security camera perched on a pole, swiveling lazily as if bored. The gate was open, unattended. I hesitated. The manifest showed a signature line here, but no one was around to sign or check me in. I killed the engine. The sudden silence inside the cab was almost deafening. Outside, the mist thickened, curling around the truck like fingers. I stepped out, the gravel crunching under my boots. The air was colder now, sharp against my skin, making the fine hairs on my arms stand up. A faint buzzing filled my ears, like distant neon lights flickering, but there was no sign of any. The warehouse loomed ahead, its metal siding dull and scratched. The loading dock was empty, save for a single wooden pallet stacked with crates marked in the same strange lettering as my manifest. I walked over, feeling the rough wood splinter beneath my fingers as I touched one crate. It was cold, almost icy despite the mild morning air. Something caught my eye, a small, folded piece of paper tucked under the corner of the pallet. I unfolded it carefully. The handwriting was neat but unfamiliar, the ink smudged slightly from moisture. Do not trust what you see. Deliveries change more than cargo. I blinked. The words were simple but unsettling. I looked around, half expecting someone to step out from the shadows and explain, but the lot was empty except for the steady drip of water from a nearby pipe and the faint squeak of the security camera. I stuffed the note into my jacket pocket and climbed back into the cab. The engine rumbled to life, the warmth returning. The truck felt heavier, somehow, like the weight of the note pressed down on my chest. I glanced at the GPS again. The next stop was miles away, a city skyline hazy in the distance. I tried to shake the unease, telling myself I was just tired, that the long hours were messing with my head. But when I glanced at the manifest again, my eyes caught a new entry I hadn't noticed before: cargo, perception units. Quantity, unknown. I rubbed my temples. Perception units, I muttered. The words tasted strange on my tongue, like something meant to be said aloud but better left unspoken. The truck rolled forward, tires humming against the asphalt. The mist clung to the edges of the road, and the world outside the cab seemed just a little less certain than it had been an hour ago. The road ahead was familiar, but I felt like I was driving into a place I didn't fully understand. A flicker of movement caught my eye in the rearview mirror, a shadow darting between the trees. I blinked, but there was nothing there. Just the empty highway, the creeping fog, and the faint, lingering scent of lilies. I swallowed hard and shifted gears, telling myself to keep moving. To keep driving. Because whatever this was, it wasn't going to wait for me to figure it out. The mist was thick enough to swallow the trees whole, the kind of fog that blurred the edges of the world until everything beyond the headlights looked like a half-remembered dream. I grabbed my phone, flicked it on, and stared at the screen until the glow felt harsh in the dark cab. No messages. No missed calls. Just my own reflection staring back at me, tired, creased, and a little too pale under the dim light. I ran a hand through my thinning hair and tried to shake off the sticky feeling in my chest. There was no way this was just a glitch or some prank. Something was off, and I needed to figure out what. The air outside was cold and smelled faintly of damp earth and gasoline. I stepped out, the crunch of gravel under my boots loud enough in the silence. A few distant cars hummed along the highway, their headlights cutting through the fog like searching eyes. I walked to the edge of the parking lot, where a chain-link fence separated the rest stop from a dense patch of woods. The trees stood like silent sentinels, their branches reaching out like fingers in the fog. I remembered that shadow from the mirror, the quick flicker between the trees. Not a trick of the dim light that cast long, dancing shadows. Not a stray animal. Something deliberate. It stuck in my mind like a pebble in a shoe. "Hey," a voice called from behind me, low and cautious. I turned to see the night shift attendant stepping out from the small kiosk, a flashlight in one hand and a steaming cup of coffee in the other. His name was Frank, a guy I'd seen a dozen times before but never really talked to. Tonight, he looked as worn as I felt, with dark circles under his eyes and a jacket zipped up tight against the cold. "You okay?" he asked, stepping closer so I could see the concern in his eyes. I shrugged, not sure how to explain the weird cargo manifest or the creeping fog that felt like it was pressing in. "Just something looks strange out here," I said instead. "Ever seen anything weird around this place?" Frank took a slow sip from his coffee, eyes narrowing as he scanned the tree line. "Weird? Depends on what you mean. Folks say this stretch of highway's cursed. Weird accidents, strange sounds at night, people disappearing. But you're a trucker, you've probably heard all the stories." I nodded. I had, but none of the tales ever felt real until now. The air smelled colder, like the world was holding its breath. I glanced back toward the highway. The fog seemed to thicken, swirling in unnatural patterns, as if it were alive. "Cursed or not, it's the kind of place where you want to keep moving," Frank said, his voice dropping. "I don't like being out here after dark. Not anymore." I swallowed hard and pulled the manifest closer to my chest. "You ever heard of perception units?" Frank blinked, confusion crossing his face. "Can't say that I have. Sounds like some kind of tech thing. Maybe part of those new cargo contracts?" "Maybe," I said, but the words felt hollow. Back inside the cab, I pulled the manifest up again, scanning the entries more closely. The previous deliveries listed things that didn't make sense: temporal samples, cognitive loads, emotional residues. If these were just code names, they were the most cryptic ones I'd ever seen. And if not, well, I didn't want to entertain that possibility. I clicked through the GPS logs and delivery confirmations. Every drop-off point was real: a warehouse here, a distribution center there, but something about the timing felt off. Like the clocks were running fast or slow around me. At one stop, I remember the old man who signed for the cargo. His eyes had been too clear, too sharp, like he was watching me instead of just doing a job. He'd smiled without warmth, and when I looked back at him, he was gone. I could swear he hadn't moved his chair once. The night crawled on, and I found myself checking the mirrors more often, watching those empty roads and the shifting fog. The radio crackled faintly with static and half-heard voices, but no clear signal. I was alone, except for whatever was hiding in the shadows of this endless highway. The next morning, I pulled into a diner just off the interstate. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, frying the edges of the cracked vinyl booths. The smell of burnt coffee and frying bacon filled the air. I slid into a corner seat, trying to focus on the breakfast menu, but my hands trembled enough to spill syrup on the table. "Rough night?" the waitress asked, a woman with tired eyes and a name tag that read Jill. Her voice was soft, like she didn't want to pry but couldn't help herself. "You could say that," I muttered, staring at the pancakes like they might reveal some hidden truth. She poured me a fresh cup of coffee without asking and sat down opposite me, folding her hands. "You're not the first to come through here looking rattled. This place has a way of getting under your skin." I glanced up, surprised. "You see it too?" She hesitated, then nodded. People talk about the deliveries, the strange things happening along the route. Some drivers quit. Others don't make it through the week. Her eyes flicked toward the window, where the world outside looked sharp and ordinary, but the light seemed colder somehow. I took a slow sip of coffee, the bitter taste grounding me just a little. What kind of things? Changes. Small at first. A sign missing letters. A town that's suddenly gone, or one that wasn't there yesterday. People who don't remember you, even if you swear they knew you the day before. It's like reality phrase along this highway. I laughed, but it was dry and hollow. Sounds like I'm losing my mind. Maybe. Or maybe something's messing with your mind. She pushed a folded piece of paper across the table. A friend gave me this. Says it might help. I unfolded it carefully. It was a list of names, dates, delivery points. Some I recognized from my own manifest, but others were new locations that didn't appear on any map I'd ever seen. Next to each entry were scribbled notes: disappearance, memory loss, altered behavior. At the bottom, a phone number was scrawled in shaky handwriting. Who's this from? I asked. Someone who's been tracking it all. You're not the only one. She glanced at the door, then back at me. If you want to get to the bottom of this, you'll need help. I folded the paper slowly, feeling the weight of it in my hands. The world outside looked suddenly sharper, the sunlight cutting through the diner's grimy windows with an almost cruel clarity. I wanted to believe it was all some elaborate coincidence, a prank, or some elaborate bureaucratic error. As I stood to leave, Jill called after me. Watch your back out there. The highway's not just a road anymore. Outside, the truck sat waiting, its engine humming softly like a distant heartbeat. The fog had thinned, but the air still smelled faintly of lilies, sweet and unsettling. I climbed into the cab and stared at the manifest one last time before starting the engine. Perception units, I muttered again. The phrase felt heavier now, like the name of something dangerous, something I couldn't outrun. And as the highway stretched out before me, I knew the next delivery wouldn't just test my driving skills. It would test everything I thought I understood about the world, and maybe even my own mind. The road rolled on, endless and uncertain. And behind me, I could swear I heard a whisper. Not on the radio, not outside the truck. Inside my head. A voice that didn't belong to me. I sat back in the cracked vinyl booth, the diner's flickering neon sign casting a sickly green wash over the table. The paper felt heavier now, more than just a list. It was a map of something bigger, darker. The names weren't just random, they were points on a timeline, a trail of broken deliveries and broken people. Disappearance, memory loss, altered behavior. Whoever had written that wasn't guessing. They'd seen it all, or at least some of it. I rubbed the back of my neck, the skin prickling like I'd been in the sun too long. This wasn't just about cargo anymore. The manifests, those impossible contents, the strange changes after each delivery, it wasn't random. It was deliberate. Or maybe accidental. But definitely real. Are you sure this isn't just some conspiracy nonsense? I asked, voice low, trying to convince myself more than her. She shrugged, eyes sharp, scanning the diner windows like they might crack open and swallow us whole. I know how that sounds. But the patterns don't lie. People on that list, they vanished or came back different. You're next if you keep running blind. The clock above the greasy coffee machine ticked louder than usual. I glanced at it. Almost midnight. The night shifted outside, cooler now, with a wind that rattled the brittle leaves piled near the curb. The faint smell of rain teased the air, though the sky was stubbornly clear. I looked down at the phone number scrawled at the bottom of the paper. It wasn't just a contact, it was a lifeline. Except, who was I supposed to call? A stranger tracking a nightmare I barely understood? Okay, I said finally, voice rough. Who's this friend of yours? The one who gave you this list. She hesitated, biting her lower lip. Name's Mallory. Used to run logistics on the old routes, before the gateways went online. Got out when things started. Twisting. She's cautious. Won't meet just anyone. Her eyes locked onto mine. But she trusts me. And if I say you're worth talking to, she might listen. That was a start. Maybe. Or maybe just another layer of trouble waiting to unravel. I folded the paper carefully, sliding it into my jacket pocket. The diner's overhead light flickered again, and a distant dog barked, sharp and sudden, breaking the quiet like a warning. I'm going to call her, I said. Tomorrow morning. I need to know what I'm really hauling across those gateways. My hands trembled despite myself. I wasn't used to feeling this exposed. She nodded, standing up. Good. And hey, be careful. Not just on the road. Out here. She tapped her temple. I wanted to laugh off the warning, but I didn't. Something in her tone told me she meant it. After she left, the silence in the diner felt oppressive. The clatter of dishes behind the counter, the hum of the old refrigerator in the corner, it all seemed distant, like I was underwater. I stared out the window at the empty highway stretching into the night, the lines painted on asphalt disappearing into shadows. Back at my rig, the cab smelled of stale coffee and leather. I ran my fingers over the dashboard, the familiar roughness grounding me. I pulled out the manifest from my jacket, the one for the last delivery, the one that didn't make sense. The list had said agricultural equipment. What I'd actually hauled were crates wrapped in thick tarps, sealed tight, no labels. I'd never seen anything like the weight or shape. The driver at the drop-off point had been nervous, too nervous, and kept glancing over his shoulder while signing off. He'd said nothing about the cargo, just handed me a slip with a location that wasn't on any map I owned. I flipped the paper over, scanning for any hidden notes, anything I'd missed in the dim light. That's when I noticed it. A small, almost invisible stamp in the corner of the manifest, an emblem I hadn't seen before. It looked like a circle with 3 intersecting lines, like a crude compass rose. I tapped the symbol with a fingertip, the paper crinkling softly. The emblem was faint, almost as if it had been added after printing. Like a secret mark. I tried to shake off the feeling. Maybe it was nothing. But something about it felt like a signature. A calling card. The next morning, I woke up with a dry mouth and a pounding head. The motel room smelled of bleach and cheap carpet. Outside, the sun was just beginning to melt the shadows off the cracked pavement. I found a payphone down the hall odd, but the motel's Wi-Fi was spotty, and my burner phone's battery was dead. The receiver was cold in my hand, the cord tangled and sticky. I dialed the number from the paper. It rang twice. Hello? A woman's voice. Calm. Wary. This is... I'm calling about the list. Mallory gave it to me. There was a pause. Then, you have to understand what you're dealing with. These gateways, this whole network, it's not just logistics. It's control. Manipulation. And once you're in, there's no going back. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I gripped the receiver tighter, knuckles white. Why? What do you mean? Who's behind this? People you wouldn't expect. Corporations, governments, even some of the drivers. They've all got stakes in keeping these routes open. But the cargo, it's not always what it seems. Sometimes it's people. Sometimes it's memories. Sometimes it's something else. I swallowed hard. People? Memories? Yes. And the worst part? Every delivery changes the world outside. Not in ways you can see right away, but small things. Signs, faces, even the way the air feels. You've felt it too, haven't you? The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I thought about the strange faces at drop points, the odd way towns seemed off-kilter after I passed through. I don't know how much longer I can do this, I said quietly. I want out. Too late. Her voice was flat. Shadows clung to the edges of the cracked pavement, whispering secrets only the night dared to hear. I felt my chest tighten, a cold, sinking weight settling over me. The road I'd been driving for years had shifted beneath me, and the horizon had vanished. Listen, she added, voice softening a little. You need to meet Mallory. Face to face. She can explain everything. But be careful who you trust. Not all drivers are what they seem. Some are protectors. Some are predators. The line went dead before I could ask more. I stared at the receiver, then at the cracked motel ceiling. My hands were shaking uncontrollably now, sweat slick and cold. The world outside was no longer the one I'd known. The cargo I hauled, the roads I traveled, they were traps. And I was caught. I looked back at the manifest, the strange emblem still vivid on the page. No turning back. No escape. I had to know the truth. But the truth, I realized, might be the thing that finally broke me. Too late. Her words hung in the stale cab air like a warning, cold and final. I stared at the receiver, the plastic cold against my clammy palm, and swallowed hard. The highway outside stretched endlessly, dark and unyielding, as if daring me to keep going. But I wanted out. God, I wanted out. I sat there for a long moment, the engine ticking down, the silence thick enough to taste. The glow from the dashboard flickered, casting uneven shadows on the worn vinyl seats. Somewhere, a distant dog barked, sharp and sudden, pulling me back to reality. My hands trembled. Not from cold. From something else. I picked up the manifest again, those impossible listings burning in my mind. People. Memories. Something else. She said it like it was the worst thing in the world. And maybe it was. But what did it mean? How could cargo be memories? Or worse, people? I shook my head, trying to clear the fog of confusion creeping in. The truck's interior smelled like old leather and stale coffee, a scent that usually comforted me but now felt suffocating. I glanced at my reflection in the cracked mirror above the windshield. Dark circles framed my eyes, my jaw clenched so tight it ached. Was I losing it? Or was this hell real? I reached for the CB radio, fingers fumbling. Dispatch, come in, I said, voice rough. Static answered. No reply. Not even a crackle. The silence felt deliberate. The night pressed on. I had to make the next drop at the edge of some forgotten industrial town, the kind of place where the streetlights buzzed low and the sidewalks cracked like old bones. I knew I'd find answers there, or maybe just more questions. I pulled out of the rest stop and rolled onto the highway. The air was cool, tinged with the faint scent of rain. The truck's headlights carved through the darkness, illuminating signs that seemed wrong. One read "Welcome to Harrison," but the font was unfamiliar, the edges of the letters blurred like a bad photocopy. I blinked. Nothing changed. The radio crackled again, faint this time, a whisper buried beneath static. A voice, maybe, but gone before I could catch the words. At the town's outskirts, the street lamps flickered erratically. I slowed, heart hammering. The cab felt smaller, the shadows longer. I spotted a figure standing by the side of the road, a man, or maybe a boy. His face was pale, almost waxy, eyes too wide. He didn't move as I passed, just stared. I blinked again, wondering if exhaustion had finally cracked me. But then my side mirror caught something, a second figure lurking behind a rusted dumpster, watching. I turned my head sharply, but the street was empty. I pulled into the delivery yard, the gravel crunching under the tires. The gate was ajar, swinging slowly in the breeze. No one greeted me. The place smelled of oil and damp concrete, with a faint metallic tang that made my stomach twist. I stepped out, the night air cool against my skin. I checked the manifest one last time. The cargo was listed as industrial parts, but the crate labels were smeared, the ink bleeding like wet paint. I pried open the largest crate. Inside, nothing but tangled wires and cracked glass shards. Industrial parts? I muttered. The pieces looked useless, broken. But then, beneath the shards, something caught my eye, a small, folded piece of paper. I unfolded it carefully. The handwriting was hurried, almost desperate. They're watching. Not all gateways lead out. Some trap you where you least expect it. A chill ran down my spine. I slammed the crate shut and looked around. The shadows seemed to pulse, the silence heavy. A sudden noise, a soft scraping from inside the warehouse, snapped my head toward the building. Nothing visible, but the sound was unmistakable. I called out, voice low, "Hello? Anyone there?" No answer. Just the hum of distant machinery and the occasional creak of metal. I stepped inside cautiously. The air was thick, humid, filled with the scent of rust and something else, something sour, like sweat and fear. The floor was littered with debris, broken pallets and discarded packaging. The beam of my flashlight cut through the darkness, landing on rows of crates stacked haphazardly. Then I saw it, footprints. Small, muddy, leading deeper into the cavernous space. They weren't mine, and they didn't belong to any of the usual workers. They were fresh. My breath caught. I wasn't alone. "Who's here?" I whispered. The beam trembled in my hand. The footprint stopped at a large metal door, slightly ajar. A faint glow seeped through the crack, pulsing rhythmically like a heartbeat. I reached out, fingers brushing cold metal. The door creaked open wider, revealing a narrow passage descending into darkness. The glow came from below, soft but insistent. I hesitated. Every instinct screamed to turn back. But the words on the note echoed in my mind. Not all gateways lead out. I stepped inside. The air grew colder, stale, carrying a faint scent of mildew and something metallic. The sound of dripping water echoed off the walls, the rhythm irregular and unsettling. The narrow stairwell ended in a low-ceilinged chamber, dimly lit by a series of strange, flickering bulbs. They cast unsteady shadows that danced on the concrete walls. There, in the center, was a screen, old, grainy, flickering like an old television set. On it, distorted images played, faces I recognized, but twisted and blurred. My own face appeared briefly, eyes wide, mouth open in silent scream. I stumbled back, heart pounding, the air thick with a suffocating weight. The screen crackled, and suddenly the images shifted, maps, coordinates, strange symbols. It was a control panel of some kind. A gateway control. The very thing I'd been unknowingly part of. Then a voice. The road was quieter than usual that morning. The hum of the engine felt different, more mechanical, less like an old friend's steady heartbeat. I glanced down at the dashboard, fingers tapping the worn steering wheel, and the flickering green light on the dimensional gateway console caught my eye again. That same blinking signal I'd learned to dread over these past weeks. The gateway was ready, but I wasn't sure I wanted to go through it anymore. I'd been running these routes, these impossible deliveries, for months now. Each drop-off warped something subtle in my world. Time shifted just enough. Colors seemed off. People's expressions held a strange hesitance, like they were suppressing something. And it wasn't just my head. I tried to convince myself it was exhaustion, or maybe a side effect of the weird cargo manifests that kept listing things that didn't exist: quantum refractors, atmospheric resonators, nonlinear temporal modules. What the hell was I hauling? What was I delivering? The company never explained, and no one else seemed to question it. Today was different. The last manifest had been worse than usual, listing human behavioral vectors as part of the contents. I'd laughed it off at the time, but now the phrase crawled under my skin like a cold, invisible spider. When I looked in the rearview mirror, the back of the trailer was just a dull, blank metal box. Nothing inside made sense. I pulled up the highway near a rest stop, the smell of diesel and fresh asphalt thick in the morning air. My hands trembled slightly as I reached for the manifest again. It was crumpled and stained, the print fading in places. The words stared up at me like a riddle with no solution. A voice broke the silence, rough and unexpectedly close. "You look like you could use a break." I jumped, turning toward the source. An older man sat on the bench nearby, a weathered baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. His gaze was steady, almost too steady, as if he'd been watching me for some time. "Yeah," I said, forcing a smile. "Long haul. Makes a guy feel a little off." He nodded, his lips turning up in a faint smile. "I know how that sounds. But sometimes, the road changes you without you realizing it." I frowned, gripping the manifest tighter. You ever hear of cargo manifest listings that don't make sense? Like, impossible? He laughed, a dry, short sound. Impossible? Kid, the world's full of things people pretend don't exist. You just gotta learn which ones to ignore. But I couldn't. I didn't want to ignore this anymore. The changes in the world around me were too real. The way the diner waitress blinked a second too long at me. The way the trees outside my truck seemed to lean in, almost listening. The way my own reflection in the mirror hesitated before it matched my movements. "I think someone's messing with me. Or maybe with reality," I admitted, voice low. "And I don't know why." The man's eyes sharpened. "Messing with you, huh? You ever think it's not some grand cosmic thing? Maybe it's people. People who want control, who don't care about the cost." He stood, stretching his back, and held out a hand. "Name's Earl. I've been watching those shipments too. I've seen what they do. The deliveries, the changes, they're part of something bigger. Something dangerous." I hesitated, then shook his hand. His grip was firm, grounding. "Tell me more," I said. We sat together on that cracked bench as the sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the parking lot. Earl spoke in low, careful tones about a network of people, corporate types, researchers, and government agents using these dimensional gateways to manipulate economies, societies, even individuals. The cargo wasn't just goods, it was influence, control. Behavioral data, psychological triggers, engineered scarcity. All packaged up and shipped through these portals, hidden from public view. "You're not crazy," he said. "This is real. But it's also dangerous to know." I swallowed hard, feeling the weight of his words settle like a stone in my gut. If this was true, then every delivery I'd made was a link in a chain I never wanted to be part of. "Why tell me?" I asked. Earl shrugged. "Because you're awake now. And because you're still deciding what side you're on." The thought made my head spin. I'd been a cog, a driver, a delivery guy. But now, what was I? Back in my truck, I stared at the dashboard again, the green light flickering insistently. The gateway was ready. I could go through, make another delivery, keep the wheels turning. Or I could stop. Walk away. Maybe even fight back. But fight who? The manifest never named names. The people behind it stayed in shadows. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath. The diesel scent was sharp and familiar, cutting through the tension like a cold splash of water. I could still hear the distant bark of a dog, the rustle of leaves stirred by a passing breeze. Life, in its messy, unpredictable way, was still out there. I reached over and switched off the gateway console. No more deliveries. Later that day, I found a diner with cracked vinyl booths and the smell of burnt coffee. The waitress, the same one from earlier, smiled without hesitation this time. I ordered a sandwich and sat by the window, watching the world outside move on. Maybe the changes wouldn't stop right away. Maybe the world was already different because of everything I'd done. But I had to believe there was a line I could draw, one that would mark the end of this strange, twisted journey. I pulled out a notebook from my bag and began to write. Everything I'd seen, heard, felt. The impossible manifests, the unsettling deliveries, the quiet menace lurking behind it all. I didn't know if anyone would ever read it, but it was a start. A new kind of route. Not through dimensional gateways, but through truth. The sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the table. Outside, the streets were emptying, the faint hum of evening settling in. I felt the weight of it all, the fear, the confusion, the exhaustion, but also something else. A flicker of hope. I wasn't alone anymore. And maybe that was enough. The road ahead was uncertain. Always had been. But for the first time in a long time, I was driving with my eyes wide open. The green light stayed off. The gateway silent. I closed the notebook, the pages thick with a new kind of resolve. No more deliveries. No more silence. Just the truth. And me. Story 4, Unseen Observer, the stranger who knows too much. I never thought much about the train station, the one in the city's east end where the concrete was chipped, and the overhead lights buzzed with a tired, yellow glow. That Tuesday morning was no different. The platform was crowded, but not unbearably so. People shuffled past me, their faces blurred in the aft light, all of us trying not to think about the slow crawl of the train schedule or the week ahead. The air smelled faintly of rain and something else, something metallic, maybe the train tracks themselves. I pulled my jacket tighter around my neck, the ruffle prickling my skin. I just checked the time on my phone when I noticed a man standing a few feet away. He wore a dark green jacket, the kind that looked expensive but was worn thin at the elbows. He wasn't doing anything unusual, just standing there, hands in pockets, eyes flicking around like he was waiting for someone. Except, after a moment, his gaze settled on me. Not a casual glance, but a steady, deliberate look that made my skin tighten. He smiled, a brief, almost shy curve of his lips, and then took a step closer. My first thought was that he was going to ask for directions or a cigarette, something pedestrian. I braced for it. Instead, he said, "You're always here around this time, aren't you?" Same train, same platform. I blinked. That was true, but hardly remarkable. "Yeah, I guess so." He nodded, as if this confirmed some unspoken agreement. I've noticed. You always read the same book on your phone. The one about the history of jazz. I froze. How could he know that? I hadn't mentioned it to anyone, not even my closest friends. I looked down at my phone, still open to that exact book. I didn't mean to startle you, he said quickly, hands raised slightly, palms out. Just happened to observe. I'm not a stalker or anything. Just someone who keeps an eye on the world around him. His voice was calm, almost rehearsed, but there was something in the way he spoke that made me want to step back, to put space between us. He took another step closer. You were at that coffee shop on 42nd last Thursday. The one where the barista spells your name wrong every time. You complained softly, but you kept going back. I swallowed hard. Okay, that's enough. How do you know any of that? He shrugged, like it was no big deal. I'm good at noticing patterns. You have a routine. I see it. I'm just a passerby. Passerby, I repeated, my voice lower. The word felt wrong. Empty. Threatening. He smiled again, broader this time, but it didn't reach his eyes. You dropped your wallet on the escalator last month. I picked it up and handed it to the attendant. You didn't even realize until you were halfway to your office. I looked around. The crowd was the same. No one else seemed to notice this quiet exchange. The distant rumble of an arriving train hummed beneath the station's announcements. The smell of rain had shifted. Now it was sharper, like ozone before a storm. Why are you telling me this? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He paused, then said, because you should know how visible you are. Not just here, but everywhere. People see you. They remember. Sometimes, more than you'd like. A shiver ran down my spine. I hated how my hands trembled as I gripped the strap of my bag. I wanted to walk away, to disappear into the crowd, but my feet felt glued to the spot. He glanced at the digital clock overhead. Train's coming. I'm going to leave you alone now. But think about what I said. You're not as private as you believe. And with that, he melted back into the throng, swallowed up by the mass of commuters pressing toward the platform's edge. I stood there, the words echoing in my mind. Not as private as I believed. Was it true? Had I been so careless, so obvious? Or was this some kind of game, a cruel joke played by a stranger who knew too much? The train screeched to a halt, doors sliding open with a mechanical sigh. I stepped inside, heart hammering, the man's face lingering in the back of my mind like a shadow I couldn't shake. Outside, the rain started to fall. Not hard, just enough to blur the city lights and wash the platform with a cold, gray sheen. Sometimes, I thought, it's easier not to look too closely at the world around you. But that morning, at that crowded station, I realized how little I really knew about who was watching. The carriage was nearly empty, save for a woman curled into herself near the window, humming softly to a tune only she could hear. I took a seat opposite her, the cold metal biting through my jacket as I settled in. The rhythmic clatter of the train on the tracks was hypnotic, and for a moment, the city's chaos seemed distant, muted by the hum of motion. But the man's face still pressed against my thoughts. Who was he? Why had he been following me? Questions spiraled without answers, twisting tighter with every passing station. I knew I couldn't ignore it. Something was unraveling beneath the surface of this ordinary morning, a thread pulling me deeper into a web I wasn't ready to face. The rain tapped steadily against the window, blurring the city into streaks of color. Outside, life moved on, indifferent to my unease. I clenched my fists, deciding then that I wouldn't let fear dictate my steps. Whatever was coming, I had to meet it head on. The train accelerated, and so did the pounding of my heart, matching the urgent rhythm of the journey ahead. The train slowed into my stop just as the rain began to let up, the wet pavement outside reflecting the dim glow of the station lights. Still, the words he'd spoken clung to me, too specific, too precise to be coincidence. The way he described my apartment's cluttered kitchen, the old coffee stains on my favorite mug, even the arguments I'd had with my sister last month, none of it could have been overheard by a casual passerby. I rubbed the back of my neck, feeling the cold sweat creeping down, the kind you get when you realize you're not as anonymous as you thought. I pulled out my phone, flicking through messages and missed calls, almost hoping for a familiar name to pop up. Nothing unusual. No alerts, no weird notifications. Just the usual flood of group chats and reminders. But then, an idea struck me. If this stranger was watching me this closely, maybe I wasn't the only one. Maybe someone else had noticed something too. I thought back to the coffee shop near my office where I'd stopped yesterday. The one with the creaky wooden floor and the faint smell of cinnamon and burnt espresso. I'd been there almost every day for the past 3 months, yet never saw anyone suspicious. Or did I? There was that man who always sat in the corner, scribbling in a battered notebook. I dismissed him as just another writer or student. But what if he was connected, maybe even the same person who approached me today? I shivered despite the mild night air and started walking toward the coffee shop, my boots slapping against the wet concrete. The streetlights flickered overhead, some buzzing faintly like distant wasps. I passed by the newsstand that sold old magazines and dog-eared paperbacks, and the scent of roasted chestnuts from a nearby vendor mingled with the dampness in the air. Inside the coffee shop, the familiar warmth hit me like a wave. The smell of coffee grounds and chipped paint filled the room, and the low murmur of conversation was a gentle hum against the clinking of cups. The man in the corner was there, just as I remembered, gray hair curling at the edges, thick glasses slipping down his nose, and that well-worn notebook open in front of him. I hesitated, gripping the edge of a nearby table. Should I confront him? Or would that just make me look ridiculous? I settled for ordering a black coffee, trying to calm the knot tightening in my stomach. The barista, a young woman with a nose ring and bright blue hair, gave me a sympathetic look. She must have noticed my tension. "Long day?" she asked quietly. I nodded, not trusting my voice. "Yeah. Something strange happened." I didn't elaborate. I took my coffee to a corner seat, where I could watch the man without seeming obvious. He glanced up briefly, eyes sharp but unreadable. I caught a glimpse of his notebook, scribbled lines, a few sketches, and what looked like a date circled in red. My pulse quickened. Was he keeping track of me? Of other people? I pulled out my own notebook from my bag, a habit I'd picked up after the encounter, to jot down details. I wrote down the man's description, the time, the exact phrases he'd used. Each word felt heavier on the page, as though writing it down made it more real, more dangerous. Then my phone buzzed, an unknown number. My hands trembled as I answered, the screen's glow stark in the dim light. "Hello?" A voice, calm but cold. "You're looking in the wrong places." I froze. The line went dead. I stared at the phone, my breath catching in my throat. How did they get my number? Was it the man? Or someone else entirely? I packed up quickly, the warmth of the coffee shop now feeling like a trap. Outside, the rain had stopped altogether, but the streets were slick, reflecting the city's flickering neon like a fractured mirror. I decided to head home, but I kept glancing over my shoulder, every shadow a potential threat. Back in my apartment, I locked the door twice and pulled the curtains tight. The familiar clutter of my space, the stack of overdue bills, the half-finished crossword puzzle, the old record player gathering dust, should have been comforting. Instead, it felt like a cage. I couldn't shake the sensation that unseen eyes were pressing against the windows, waiting. I sat down at the kitchen table, the cold surface biting through the thin fabric of my shirt. My phone buzzed again. Another message, no sender. How well do you really know your past? A cold knot twisted in my stomach. I wanted to believe it was a prank, someone's idea of a joke. But deep down, I knew better. Someone was inside my life, threading through it with a purpose I couldn't yet understand. I tried calling my sister, hoping to hear a familiar voice, to anchor myself to something real. The line rang twice before she picked up, her voice warm but tired. Hey. Everything okay? I hesitated, then told her about the strange man, the messages, the feeling of being watched. She listened in silence, then said, "You need to be careful. People like that, they don't just disappear." Her words echoed in the empty apartment long after the call ended. I couldn't sleep. The shadows in the corners seemed to pulse, breathing with secrets I wasn't meant to know. I kept replaying the man's words, the way he'd looked me in the eye and spoken as if he'd lived inside my memories for years. Was I imagining it? Was someone playing a game? Or was my entire life suddenly an open book for a stranger to read at will? I knew one thing for sure. Tomorrow, I have to find out who he was and why he was so intent on peeling back the layers I thought were mine alone. But as the clock ticked past midnight and silence settled like a heavy blanket, I realized I might already be too late. The night dragged on, thick and restless. I didn't sleep. At some point, I gave up on pretending I would, pulled my phone close, and scrolled through the messages again. The ones he had sent. The exact dates, the places, the moments, the morning I slipped on the wet pavement near the cafe, the argument I had with my sister last Christmas, the time I cried in the park after the breakup. How could he know all that? It wasn't just casual observation. It was something else, something deliberate. I tossed my phone onto the bed, the screen flashing once before going dark. I sat up, rubbing my face with my hands, trying to shake off the fog settling in my head. The idea that someone had been watching me, tracking me, was unbearable. But what was worse was the feeling that I was already caught. Like I'd crossed a line, and there was no going back. Morning came like a punch to the gut. The sky was an unbroken sheet of gray, the city muffled beneath a soft drizzle. I left the apartment with a shaking hand and a coffee in a paper cup, even though I barely tasted it. Every step toward the station felt heavier, the faces blurring past me without recognition. I wasn't sure if I was being watched or if it was all in my head, but something had shifted. I didn't trust the air around me anymore. I sat on a bench near the entrance, pulling my coat tighter around me, scanning the crowd like I was looking for a ghost. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw him. The man from the train station. Same coat, the same tired eyes that seemed to hold 1,000 secrets. He wasn't moving toward me this time, just standing a few feet away, pretending to read the schedule on the wall. My throat tightened. I thought about getting up and leaving, but my legs wouldn't listen. Instead, I watched him, waiting for something to happen. He glanced at me casually, then, without breaking his posture, said, "You're smarter than most. You'd have left by now if you didn't want this." His voice was low, calm, but there was an edge to it that made the air around us crackle. I swallowed hard. "What do you want from me?" My voice sounded smaller than I expected. He smiled, small, almost sad. "I don't want anything. Not really." He shifted his weight, eyes flickering with something unreadable. "I'm just curious. You've left traces. Patterns. People like you, they don't realize how much they reveal. You think your life is private, but it's not. Not anymore." I clenched my fists, the rough fabric of my coat biting into my palms. Why are you telling me this? Because you deserve to know the truth. You're being watched. By more than me. He looked around briefly, voice dropping even lower. There's a network. People who watch, who collect. Not for fun. For control. Control. The word hit me like a cold wave. I shook my head, trying to make sense of it. That's impossible. You're just one guy. He laughed softly, a humorless sound. One guy with a few thousand eyes behind him. You think you're the only one? Everyone has someone watching. I'm just the messenger. Why me? Why follow me? He hesitated, then said, because you crossed a line. You asked questions you shouldn't have. You noticed things. You weren't supposed to. The rain picked up, pattering against the glass ceiling above us, drumming steadily like a warning. I could feel the weight of his gaze, heavy and unblinking. I don't want trouble, I said. I don't want any of this. He shrugged. Trouble's already here. You just haven't seen it yet. A sudden urgency exploded inside me. I needed to get away, to disappear. But as I stood, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, eyes wide. Another message. No number, just words. We're closer than you think. You can't run. My breath caught. The station felt too loud now, the chatter, the footsteps, the screeching brakes of arriving trains. I looked up at the man, but he was already walking away, swallowed by the crowd like a shadow melting into the gray. I didn't move, because I knew then this wasn't something I could outrun. Not anymore. The platform was emptying rapidly. Overhead, the digital board flickered, announcing the next train in 5 minutes. I needed to decide, stay and face whatever was coming, or disappear into the city's endless maze and hope it was enough. But deep down, I realized the choice had already been made for me. The stranger's words weren't just warnings. They were instructions. And I was already trapped. The cold weight of inevitability settled over me like a shroud. My heart hammered not from fear, but from the sharp clarity of purpose that surged through my veins. Every step I took from that moment on was no longer mine alone. They were guided by the silent commands buried in the stranger's cryptic message. The city around me blurred into a monochrome backdrop, its noise fading into a distant hum. I knew the next move would define everything. There was no room for hesitation. Somewhere beyond the flickering lights and empty benches, the pieces were already moving, closing in. And I had to be ready. The weight of unseen eyes pressed against my back as shadows shifted, urging me forward. The weight of unseen eyes pressed against my back like a physical force, cold and unyielding. I moved forward, each step measured, deliberate. The stranger's words echoed inside me, sharp and precise. I've seen you everywhere. You don't even know how exposed you are. I replayed the details he'd dropped, the scar on my left wrist from when I'd fallen off my bike at 13, the name of my first apartment building, the exact brand of tea I liked. No one could have known. No one. And yet, here I was, feeling like a fish caught in a net woven from shadows. The crowds had thinned, leaving pockets of silence between small groups clustered around the ticket machines or hunched over their phones. The usual chaos of a station at night felt hollow, like a stage stripped of its actors. I tried to focus on the sound that seemed to vibrate in my bones around me, the tap of a dozen shoes against concrete, a cough from somewhere behind a pillar, the distant bark of a dog fighting the night, but my mind kept snapping back to that man's voice. Calm, unnervingly casual. Like he wasn't just a passerby, as he claimed, but someone who had studied me, studied everything. I paused near a vending machine, the cold metal pressing against my palm. The buttons flickered, some dead, others glowing faintly. I tried to steady my breathing, the small hiss of air from the machine louder than normal in the silence. I wanted to believe it was just coincidence, that I'd imagined all of it, but I knew better. Something had shifted irreparably. Behind me, footsteps. Slow. Measured. Closer. I didn't turn. "You don't have to play this game," the voice said softly, suddenly right beside me. The stranger. His breath smelled faintly of peppermint and something metallic, maybe a mouthguard or gum. The station's harsh light caught the edges of his face, too angular, too deliberate, like someone who spent a lot of time training himself to disappear into the background. "What do you want from me?" I asked, my voice rough and uneven. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Not what you think. I'm not here to hurt you." He stepped closer, the smell of his cologne, something sharp, cedar and citrus, filling my senses until it crowded out everything else. "I want you to understand how little control you have." The words landed like a slap. Control. The one thing I'd always clung to, especially after the last few years of drifting through dead-end jobs and half-finished relationships. And yet, here was this stranger, peeling away the illusion with cold certainty. "Why me?" I whispered, the question tasting like defeat. He looked around, his gaze flickering to the empty platforms, the rows of silent benches. "Because you're easy to find. Because you've made mistakes, small ones, big ones, that left cracks wide open. You think your life is private, but it's not. You've been broadcasting it without even knowing." I swallowed hard, the bile rising in my throat. "What do you mean?" He reached into his pocket and pulled out a crumpled photo. I blinked, recognizing the grainy image instantly. Me, sitting in a cafe, head buried in a book, a faint smile on my face. How long had he been watching? Days? Weeks? Months? Here. He pressed the photo into my hand, his fingers cold and unyielding. "You don't even remember this day." "But I do. I saw you leave, watched you cross the street, saw the way you hesitated outside that bookstore." I looked up, searching his face for a hint of mercy or madness. Found neither. "What do you want me to do?" "Nothing. Yet." His voice lowered. "But you need to be ready. Because the world you think you live in, the one where your secrets are safe, is crumbling. And when it falls apart, the pieces will cut deeper than you ever imagined." My skin prickled, a shiver running down my spine. I tried to shake off the creeping dread, but it clung stubbornly, like a second skin. The station's lights flickered again, and I noticed the faint outline of a figure standing just beyond the ticket gates, watching. "Who is that?" I asked, nodding toward the shadow. The stranger didn't look. A friend. Or a reminder. He stepped back, blending into the thinning crowd. "Remember, you're never really alone. Not anymore." And then he was gone. The silence that followed was suffocating. The distant rumble of trains felt closer now, a pulsing heartbeat beneath the station's skin. I wanted to run, to disappear into the maze of alleys and streets that sprawl beyond, but my legs refused. Instead, I stood frozen, the photo burning a hole in my palm, the stranger's warning echoing in my mind. I folded the image carefully, pressing it into my pocket. The station's stale air seemed thicker, heavier, as if it had swallowed up every secret I'd ever tried to hide and was now holding them hostage. A cold wind swept through the open doors, carrying with it the sharp scent of rain and distant thunder. The sky outside was bruised purple, the clouds gathering like a storm ready to break. I had to decide. Fight or run. But the truth was, I wasn't sure I still had a choice. The pieces were moving, just like he said. and I was already part of the game. The train's brakes screeched in the distance, a harsh reminder that the night was far from over. I swallowed down the fear, or whatever it was clawing at my throat, and stepped forward. Into the darkness. The rain came suddenly, cold and sharp, turning the station's concrete floor slick beneath my feet. I swallowed hard, tasting the metallic tang of adrenaline or maybe fear. It clung to my tongue, bitter and sharp. My legs finally obeyed, carrying me toward the exit with a hesitant shuffle. The stranger's voice echoed in my mind, the strange intimacy of his knowledge refusing to loosen its grip. I wondered if I was losing my mind. How else could someone know about Ben's last birthday party, the fight with my mother, the way I hid my savings beneath the loose floorboard in my apartment? I'd never told anyone, not even my closest friends. Yet here he was, a ghost in plain sight, weaving my past into his strange monologue like some twisted storyteller. Outside, the rain hammered the pavement, sending up tiny clouds of mist. The air smelled of wet asphalt and something faintly like burnt toast, maybe the old bakery down the street, still open late for the night shift. I pulled my jacket tighter, the fabric rough against my skin, and let the noise of the city swallow me whole. I kept walking. Away from the station. Away from the impossible. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I hesitated, then pulled it out with trembling fingers. A message from Claire. Did you get home okay? You sounded weird last night. I stared at the screen, the glow too bright in the dark. I didn't know what to say. How could I explain the stranger, the photo, the feeling that my life was no longer mine? Instead, I typed, "I'm fine. Just tired." The reply came almost instantly. "Call me when you can." I put the phone away and kept moving. The streets were slick, reflections of neon signs swimming in puddles. The city had that damp, restless smell, the scent of something waiting to happen, though I wasn't sure what. I felt like I was being watched, though no one was there. Or maybe everyone was. Later, curled up on my couch with the lights low, I tried to make sense of it all. The stranger's words weren't threats exactly. Not in the way you'd expect. No demands, no promises of violence. Just an unsettling certainty that he knew me better than I knew myself, or at least, better than anyone should. I traced the edges of the photo, now tucked beneath a weight on the coffee table. It was just a picture, a moment frozen in time. But the stranger's insistence that I was already part of the game rang in my ears like a warning bell. I thought about the last few weeks, the strange coincidences, the fleeting shadows I dismissed as paranoia. The man on the train platform. The glances from strangers that lingered too long. It wasn't random. It was deliberate. I was being watched. Sleep came late and fractured. Dreams tangled with reality, a blurred collage of faces and places, of whispered secrets and half-heard conversations. I woke to the sound that seemed to vibrate in my bones of rain tapping against the window pane, the city still alive beyond the glass. The next morning, I stood by the kitchen sink, staring out at the gray sky. My hands trembled slightly as I poured coffee, the bitter steam filling the room. I needed answers. But where? I called Claire. Her voice was steady, grounding. I told her everything, or at least, the parts one could say out loud without sounding mad. She listened. No interruptions, no disbelief. Just quiet understanding. "We figure this out together," she said finally. Her words were a lifeline. I clung to them. Over the next days, I scoured my past, retracing steps, revisiting old haunts. I talked to people I hadn't seen in years, searching for any clue that could explain the stranger's knowledge. Nothing made sense. No one had noticed anything unusual. No one had followed me. But the feeling didn't fade. If anything, it grew stronger, like a shadow stretching at dusk, creeping closer with each passing hour. I started carrying the photo with me everywhere, a talisman against the unknown. The station, once a place of bustling chaos, now felt like a trap, every corner a potential hiding spot, every passerby a possible watcher. I learned to move differently, to blend in, to avoid eye contact. Paranoia gnawed at me, but I refused to let it consume me. One evening, as the light dimmed and the city's noise softened, I found myself back at the station. Not because I wanted to confront the stranger or prove something. No! It was more like I needed to face the place where my world had cracked open. The air was thick with the smell of rain and old concrete. A flickering fluorescent bulb buzzed overhead, casting uneven shadows across the tiled floor. I sat on a bench, the rough texture pressing into my skin, and let the silence wash over me. Time passed. Minutes, maybe an hour. No stranger appeared. No whispered secrets. Just the distant hum of trains and the occasional murmur of late-night travelers. In that quiet, I realized something. I was still here. Still breathing. Still me. The stranger had forced me to see my life through a lens I never wanted to peer into. But he hadn't taken it from me. Not yet. I folded the photo carefully and slipped it back into my pocket. My past wasn't a story for someone else to tell. It was mine. Fragile, messy, and real. The station's doors opened with a sigh, letting in a rush of cold air and the soft patter of rain. I stood, the weight of the night lifting slowly from my shoulders. Maybe I couldn't control who watched me. Maybe some parts of my life would always be out of reach, shadows creeping at the edges. But I could choose what to do next. I walked away from the station, toward the uncertain streets beyond, the city's heartbeat steady beneath my feet. The stranger's words still lingered, but they no longer held me captive. I was part of the game. Yes, but I was still playing. Story 5, Endless Descent, Trapped in Shifting Tunnels. I never thought I'd find myself wandering deep beneath the city, in a place where the daylight didn't reach and the air tasted sour like it hadn't moved in years. I'd been in the tunnel maybe 20 minutes when I first noticed the cracked exit sign. It hung crookedly over a rusted metal door, the fluorescent light flickering weakly, casting a jaundiced glow on the peeling wall below. The sign was old, probably from when the line was still in use, but something about it felt off. I stopped, staring up at it as if it might tell me a secret, or maybe warn me away. The air was stale, thick with the smell of damp concrete and something else, a metallic tang, like blood or rust. It stuck to my tongue, dry and bitter. I swallowed hard, my throat suddenly tight. I should have turned back then. Should have taken the nearest stairwell and gone home. But I didn't. Instead, I kept walking, and the tunnel stretched out before me like a black wound in the earth. The walls, once straight and solid, seemed to warp subtly as I moved. Was I imagining it? I blinked, rubbed my eyes. No! The far wall, the one I had just passed, looked like it was bending inward, as if the tunnel itself was breathing, slowly, menacingly. I told myself it was a trick of the light. Flickering overhead bulbs, shadows cast by broken pipes. The mind playing games when left alone too long in a place like this. I've heard stories about sensory deprivation causing hallucinations. Maybe that's what was happening. I checked my phone. No signal. Of course. The little bar at the top blinked out, leaving me with just the dim glow of the screen. I told my roommate I'd be back by 6. It was nearly 7 now. I thought about texting, then remembered the dead zone. The thought hit me hard. If I got stuck here, no one would know. I swallowed again, harder this time, and tried to steady my breathing. My hands trembled, fingers curling into fists to stop them from shaking. I hated feeling this way. A distant drip echoed down the tunnel. Water. Or maybe something else. The sound bounced off the concrete like a slow metronome. I tried to count the intervals, but the irregular rhythm made me dizzy. I paused, pressing my back against the cold wall, hoping for something solid to hold on to. The plaster was rough under my palm, crumbling in places. Dust floated down, settling on my jacket like snowflakes. I took a step forward. Something shifted. The exit sign. It was there again. I blinked hard, heart skipping. How could it be? I had passed that exact door 5 minutes ago. The same cracked sign, the same flickering light, the same tilted metal frame. It wasn't possible. I must be going in circles. I felt the first prickles of panic, though I fought them down. Logic told me to stay calm. Follow the wall, count my steps, mark my path. I pulled out a small piece of chalk from my backpack, a habit picked up from my childhood hikes, and scrawled a little item on the wall next to the door. That way, if I came back here again, I'd know. But when I looked again, the item was gone. No chalk, no mark. Just the cracked exit sign, flickering. I stared harder, feeling my stomach twist. Maybe the damp had washed it away. I tried to press harder, thinking the chalk wasn't sticking, but the wall felt unusually smooth, almost slick beneath my fingers. Not concrete. Something else. I stepped back, the air suddenly colder, and maybe even heavier. I could hear my own breath, sharp and uneven. The stale tunnel smelled different now. Less like damp concrete, more like old sweat and dust, and something faintly sour, like sour milk left too long in a fridge. Hello? My voice echoed, brittle and thin. No answer. Silence. Complete silence. I had to remind myself I wasn't alone in this. That no monsters lurked in the shadows. But the tunnel seemed to shrink around me, the walls bending and twisting just beyond my clear sight. I turned, trying to retrace my steps, but every turn felt unfamiliar. The exit sign appeared again ahead, the same cracked face, the same flicker of failing light. I swallowed, tasting that bitter tang again. I wanted to laugh, but the sound caught in my throat. Was I losing my mind? Or was the tunnel itself shifting, slowly collapsing inward, folding back on itself like some terrible origami? My phone vibrated suddenly. A single buzz. I grabbed it, heart pounding, but the screen was blank. Nothing. No message, no call. Just dead. I pressed the power button again. The screen flared weakly, then went dark. I tried again, fingers fumbling. The cold sweat on my back made my shirt stick uncomfortably. I was trapped in a place that was bending reality, or at least my perception of it. I shuffled forward, eyes darting between the warped walls and the flickering exit sign that mocked me with its broken promise of escape. Okay, I whispered to myself. Okay, just keep moving. Keep moving. But the tunnel had other plans. A low rumble vibrated beneath my feet, the ground seeming to pulse in time with my racing heartbeat. Shadows twisted unnaturally, merging and splitting like living smoke. I stumbled, catching myself on a jagged wall that suddenly felt less solid, almost fluid. Panic clawed its way up my throat. The rumble didn't stop. I took a step back. The cracked exit sign hung at a crooked angle ahead, its red glow flickering weakly. It looked the same, yet somehow different. The letters blurred at the edges, like someone had smeared grease across the glass. The air felt heavier here, like I was wading through invisible molasses. Every breath tasted dusty and bitter. I wiped my forehead with the back of my hand. "Okay," I whispered again. "Think. Just think." But my mind was a jumble. I kept replaying that moment when my phone had died, buzzing once, then going completely black. No signal, no messages, no hope. I'd never been so alone. The silence around me was absolute, except for the low thrumming beneath the concrete. I glanced back the way I'd come. The tunnel stretched endlessly behind me, dark and foreboding. I thought I caught movement, a flicker of shadow, maybe, but when I blinked, it was gone. Probably just a trick of light, or my imagination running wild. I hoped. The air shifted suddenly, colder now, and I shivered despite myself. My breath came out in small clouds that quickly vanished. The walls on either side seemed to lean inward, the paint peeling and curling like dying leaves. I ran my fingers over the cracked surface, nails scraping against something rough and uneven beneath the plaster. A loose tile? No! It was a scrap of paper, yellowed and brittle. Carefully, I peeled it free. The paper was covered in scrawled handwriting, rushed and messy. I tilted my head, squinting in the dim light. "Don't trust the walls. They listen." I blinked. What kind of nonsense was this? The words made my skin crawl, but I shoved the paper into my pocket anyway. If someone had left this here, maybe they'd been trapped too. Maybe they'd known something I didn't. I kept moving, following the tunnel toward the exit sign. Each step echoed hollowly, the sound that seemed to vibrate in my bones bouncing back at odd angles. It was like the tunnel was mocking me, making me think I was getting closer, but never quite letting me escape. Halfway there, a sudden clatter echoed from somewhere deeper in the dark, like metal scraping against concrete. My heart jumped. I froze, holding my breath. The sound stopped. Nothing. Silence. Complete silence. I swallowed the lump in my throat and whispered, "Hello? Is someone there?" My voice bounced weakly off the walls, swallowed by the vast emptiness. No answer. I tried to steady my shaking hands as I pulled out my phone. The screen was dead, no signal, no light, but I fumbled with the flashlight app, willing it to turn on. A faint glow flickered before dying again. Great. Just great. The exit sign flickered twice more, then steadied. I stared at it, willing it to be real, to mean something. But the letters seemed to twist, the E and X elongating like shadows stretching at dusk. I blinked hard. Was I imagining things? Maybe after hours underground, my mind was playing tricks. There had to be some explanation. Maybe the tunnel was old, unstable. Maybe the walls were shifting because of structural damage. The stale smell, the dampness, signs of neglect and decay. But the feeling of being watched, that was harder to explain. I tried to keep my breathing even, but my chest tightened. I stuck my fingers in my ears to block out the faintest whisper of sound, a scraping, like fingernails on stone, just beyond the edge of hearing. I shook my head. No, it couldn't be. I took a deep breath and started toward the exit again, this time slower, more deliberate. I needed to gather evidence, find a pattern. If this was some kind of trap or game, I wanted to understand the rules before it was too late. A few steps later, I stopped. The tunnel branched off to the left, a narrow passage I hadn't noticed before. I hadn't seen it because it was almost hidden by shadows and a pile of debris. Something about the way the air shifted there was different, colder, almost electric. I hesitated, then stepped toward it. The ground beneath my feet was uneven, scattered with broken tiles and bits of rusted metal. The walls here had strange markings, scratches, but not random. Letters? Numbers? They looked like some kind of code, carved in haste. I squinted. A date? March 14th, 19. And below it, a name, M. Harper. Who was M. Harper? And why had they left their mark here? My fingers traced the scratches lightly. The surface was rough, but the cuts were fresh, not weathered like the rest of the tunnel. A sudden noise made me jump. Footsteps. Not mine. Slow, deliberate, coming from deeper in the passage. I froze, heart hammering. Hello? I called out, voice cracking. Is someone there? I'm trapped. I need help. No response, just the echo of my own words bouncing back at me. The footsteps stopped too, just out of sight. I swallowed hard, wishing I'd brought more than a dead phone and a flickering flashlight. I wished I'd told someone where I was. But mostly, I wished the walls would stop shifting, stop closing in. The exit sign glowed faintly behind me, a broken beacon in the dark. I glanced at it again. This time, the letters looked clearer, no distortion. Maybe I was losing it after all. Or maybe the tunnel was trying to tell me something. I took a shaky step forward, toward the unknown footsteps and the secrets carved into the wall. All right, I muttered, voice barely audible. Let's see what you're hiding. But as I moved deeper into that shadowed passage, the stale air thickened even more, and the walls seemed to lean closer, as if listening, waiting. Something was definitely here with me. And it wasn't going away. The stale air hung heavier now, like a thick blanket I couldn't shake off. I swallowed hard, the dryness in my throat making the movement rough and ragged. The footsteps had stopped, yes, but that silence wasn't relief. It was the kind of silence that presses against your eardrums, waiting to snap. My flashlight's beam trembled in my shaking hand, casting long, jittery shadows against the warped walls. Those walls, they weren't static anymore. I caught myself thinking they might even be breathing, like the whole tunnel was alive. I know how that sounds, but the plaster bulged subtly here and there, the bricks shifting just enough to unsettle every instinct I had. Then I heard it, the faint scrape of something dragging across the ground. Not far ahead. Behind me? I spun around. Nothing. Just the echo of my own ragged breath and the oppressive silence that swallowed it whole. My mind jumped. Had I imagined it? The stale smell thickened, now mixed with something else, metal, faint and coppery. Blood? No! Not blood. Something older, rusted and forgotten. The scent clung to the air, curling into my nose, twisting my stomach into knots. I swallowed again, slower this time, forcing my heart to slow. Okay, I whispered to myself. You're not alone down here. The words barely carried past my lips before a voice answered, sharp and low, cutting through the thick air. You shouldn't be here. The voice was close, too close, but I couldn't place it. Somewhere just beyond the beam of my flashlight. I froze, every muscle taut, every nerve screaming to run. My voice caught in my throat. I couldn't tell if the voice was angry, amused, or just tired. Who's there? I managed, trying to keep my voice steady. I'm lost. Please, just help me out. Silence. Then a slow, deliberate shuffle. Help. The voice was closer now, raspier. You don't want help. Not from me. I took a cautious step forward. The beam flickered, then steadied, revealing a dark figure crouched by a pile of debris against the wall. The person's face was shadowed, features unreadable except for eyes, sharp, watchful, and tired as hell. Look, I don't want trouble, I said, raising my flashlight slightly, more to show I wasn't hiding anything than to see better. I'm just trying to find a way out. The figure shifted, standing slowly, and I noticed the way their clothes clung to their thin frame, dirt and grime streaked across a threadbare jacket. Out! The voice cracked slightly, as if the word tasted bitter. There's no out here. Not anymore. I blinked, trying to process the words. What do you mean? I've been following the signs. There are no signs anymore. Just a maze. The tunnel's been shifting for weeks. Walls collapsing, paths closing in. You're not going to find a way out because there isn't one left. I swallowed the lump rising in my throat. That explained the warped walls, the stale air, the endless looping. But it didn't explain who this person was, why they were down here, or how long they'd been trapped. How long have you been down here? I asked, voice barely more than a whisper. The figure's eyes flicked away, scanning the darkness. Too long. Long enough to know this place doesn't want anyone to leave. Not without paying. They paused and then added, You've passed that exit sign 3 times now. Twice, it wasn't real. This time, it's a warning. A warning? I echoed, heart pounding. From who? What's going on here? The person's gaze locked back on me, sharp and unyielding. People come down here thinking it's just an abandoned tunnel. That it's empty. But it's not. Not anymore. Some of us have been hiding, surviving. Others, well, they never make it out. The voice dropped to a whisper, and the tunnel? It's changing. Closing in. Narrowing. Crushing. I felt a cold sweat break out across my back. The idea the tunnel was collapsing in on itself wasn't just a trick of my mind. It was real. And we were both caught inside. I took a shaky breath, trying to steady myself. Why are you still here? Why not leave if you know the way? The figure laughed, a dry, humorless sound. You think there's a way left? The last exit collapsed months ago. We're stuck. All of us. I glanced down the tunnel behind me, trying to picture collapsing walls, the rubble that might block any escape. The cracked exit sign flashed in my mind, faint, flickering, a cruel tease. I'd been chasing that sign like a lifeline, but it was a trap. We need to keep moving, the figure said suddenly, shifting gears. Staying here means we're dead. The air's going to get worse, the walls closer. We have to find another way. I wanted to argue, to ask where, but the weight of those words crushed me. No exit. Only deeper darkness. No rescue. Only survival. Wait, I said, voice breaking. What about the others? Are there more people down here? Safe places? The figure's eyes darkened. There are others. Some worse off than you. Some dangerous. They pulled a small flashlight from a pocket and clicked it on, revealing a crude map drawn on a scrap of paper, lines and scribbles marking tunnels and dead ends. This is all we have. The tunnel's a labyrinth now. No one can trust the walls or the people. I stared at the map, the maze of lines twisting and turning like the tunnel itself. A knot tightened in my stomach. I was in deeper than I realized. No way back. No easy way out. Why tell me this? I asked. The figure shrugged, a bitter edge to the gesture. Because you're here now. Because you're a part of it. And maybe, just maybe, you can help us find a way through. I nodded slowly, the reality settling in. The cracked exit sign was no longer a beacon. It was a point of no return. Behind us, somewhere deeper in the tunnel, a faint sound echoed, something between a groan and a whisper. The walls seemed to lean in even closer, as if listening, waiting for our next move. I took a deep breath, steadying the shaking in my legs. "All right," I said, voice firmer than I felt. "Let's keep moving." The figure nodded, eyes scanning the darkness ahead. Together, we stepped forward into the twisting maze, the stale air closing in around us, the exit fading behind like a distant dream disappearing with the dawn. The stale air pressed heavier against my lungs the moment we stepped forward from the cracked exit sign, like the tunnel itself was exhaling its exhaustion. Ahead, the passage curved sharply, walls narrowing as if the tunnel was squeezing shut. I swallowed hard, tasting dust and the bitter tang of rust in the back of my throat. The faint groan I'd heard earlier came again, low and uneven, like the tunnel was complaining, or maybe warning. It wasn't the kind of sound you expect from concrete and steel. It was almost human. I shook the thought away. It was just the building settling. Or a rat, maybe. Rats were as common down here as garbage. I hoped. "Do you know what that was?" I asked, voice barely above a whisper. The figure glanced back, eyes reflecting the weak beam of my flashlight. "Could be the tunnel shifting," they said. "Could be someone else. Doesn't really matter." Their tone was flat, but I caught an edge of something. Exhaustion, I thought. Or maybe resentment. "Doesn't matter?" I echoed, confused. "Because it's all the same down here," they said, voice rough. "Walls closing in. People lost. The maze swallowing you whole if you stop paying attention." Their words hit harder than the stale air. I pulled my jacket tighter, the fabric rough against my skin. The walls, those same walls, seemed to warp again, the plaster bubbling and cracking in subtle, almost imperceptible waves. I blinked, trying to convince myself it was a trick of the light, a mirage in the dust. But it wasn't. I reached out, fingertips grazing the warped plaster, feeling the uneven surface ripple beneath my touch. My breath caught. The tunnel was changing. Slowly. Insidiously. "Look," I said, voice shaking despite my best efforts. "The walls. They're moving." The figure didn't answer right away. Instead, they stepped closer to the wall, pressing a palm flat against it. "I've seen this," they murmured. "Not often. But when I do, it means the structure's failing. The whole place could collapse any minute." Cold sweat pulled at my temples. Collapse was the last thing I needed. I thought about the map I'd studied earlier, the maze of lines and tunnels that never seemed to end. If the wall started to buckle, there was no telling how much time I had before the whole thing caved in. "We need to find another exit," I said, urgency creeping into my voice. "Anywhere but here." The figure shook their head, slow and deliberate. "No other exits. None that are safe. That's why people come down here, because they think they can find their way out. But the tunnels don't like being disturbed." "Like what?" I asked, frustration bubbling up. "Like you're poking at a sleeping beast," they said darkly. "The tunnel's alive in its own way. It's not supernatural. It's just stress, pressure, time, and people. We're not supposed to be here." I swallowed hard again, the bitter taste still clinging to my tongue. "So what do we do?" The figure looked at me, something almost pleading in their eyes. "We keep moving. We don't stop. Because if the walls catch you, if the air gets too thin, you won't have a chance to run." A sudden rumble echoed through the tunnel, louder this time, and dust rained down from the ceiling like a slow, cruel snowfall. I jumped back, heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst through my ribs. The figure grabbed my arm, steadying me. "See? It's starting already," they said. I tried to steady my breathing, feeling the cold sweat spread across my back again. The tunnel wasn't just shifting, it was dying. We pressed forward, the flashlight's beam cutting through the darkness. My eyes darted to the cracked exit sign behind us, a ghostly reminder of every failed attempt to escape. I couldn't tell if the sign was closer or farther away. The walls seemed to pulse in my peripheral vision, bending and folding like paper. "Are you sure you're real?" I muttered, half to myself. The figure glanced at me, brow furrowed. "What's that supposed to mean?" "I don't know," I said, voice cracking. "This place is messing with my head." A faint sound drifted through the tunnel, footsteps. Slow, deliberate. Not ours. Closer. "Did you hear that?" I whispered, freezing. They nodded, eyes sharp now. We're not alone. Panic rose in my chest, but I forced myself to stay calm. No sudden moves. No mistakes. The footsteps grew louder, echoing off the warped walls. I strained to see, but the beam barely reached beyond a few feet. Then, out of the gloom, a figure emerged. Not the one I was with. Someone else. I stepped back, heart hammering. "Who's there?" I called out, voice steady but low. The figure stopped, hands raised in a gesture that could have meant peace or surrender. Their clothes were ragged, face smeared with dirt and exhaustion. But their eyes, sharp, wild, held something else. Fear? Desperation? Or something darker? "Please," they said, voice hoarse. "Don't hurt me." I glanced at my companion, who nodded slightly. "We're not here to cause trouble," the figure said, voice low. "But you shouldn't be here either." "Neither should you," I shot back, trying to keep the edge out of my voice. The stranger's eyes flicked to the warped walls, then back to us. "They're coming," they said. "They don't like new faces. They watch. They wait." A cold shiver ran down my spine. "Who?" The stranger hesitated, then stepped forward just a bit, lowering their voice. "Others. People who've been trapped down here too long. They change. They don't want anyone finding the exits." I glanced around the narrowing tunnel, feeling the walls lean in closer, the stale air thick with menace. My skin prickled with the sensation of unseen eyes. "Why?" I asked. "Why keep people here?" The stranger shrugged, a bitter laugh escaping. "Because out there, life moves on. Down here, time stands still. Or maybe it just breaks. People get lost. Some give up. Others become part of the maze." I swallowed hard. The floor beneath us seemed to groan again, the dust stirring like a warning. The walls warped more aggressively, as if reacting to the stranger's words. "We need to move," my companion said urgently. "Now!" I nodded, but a knot twisted deep in my gut. This wasn't just a maze of tunnels. It was a trap. A prison. And the people inside were the real threat. As we turned to go, the stranger's voice stopped me. "Watch the walls," they said. "They'll try to trick you. They don't break all at once. They do it slowly, until you don't know which way is out. Until you stop running." The light flickered violently, and in that brief darkness, I thought I saw the walls breathe. Silence. Complete silence. Then the rumble returned closer, louder, like the tunnel was closing in for good. The cracked exit sign stared at me again. Same jagged lines through the faded green paint, same flicker in the dim bulb overhead. I blinked hard, swallowing the bitter taste in my mouth, and stepped closer. The stale air, thick with the scent of damp concrete and something faintly sour, pressed heavier against my lungs this time. I reached out and touched the rusted metal frame of the sign. It was cold, rough beneath my fingertips, but the walls behind it, those walls, were subtly shifting. Or maybe I was shifting. I couldn't trust my eyes anymore. This place was like a breath held too long, the kind that curls inside your chest and won't let go. I tried to steady myself, but the floor beneath wobbled ever so slightly, like the subway tunnel was a ship caught in a slow, endless sway. I looked down and noticed the cracks in the concrete had widened, thin veins spidering outward, crawling like they might suddenly tear open and swallow me whole. The smell was stronger now, stale, yes, but with an undercurrent of something metallic, like old pennies left to rot in a puddle. It made my skin crawl. I pressed my back against the wall, fingers digging into the rough plaster. The walls weren't just warped in vision, they were actually shifting, subtly bulging inward, then relaxing back, as if breathing. I swallowed a dry gulp and whispered to myself, "Get it together." But my mind wasn't having it. The maze felt alive, closing in, twisting. I'd been running circles for hours, or maybe days, time lost all meaning underground, and every turn brought me back here. To this sign. To the same damn spot. I crouched, head bowed, hands trembling. My flashlight flickered and died. I cursed under my breath, the sound sharp and the suffocating quiet. No echo. Just the pounding of my own heart, loud enough to drown out reason. I fumbled in my pocket for the spare batteries, fingers slick with sweat and grime. The air tasted like rust and decay. My throat burned. I swallowed again, harder this time. Then I heard it. Footsteps. Faint, but real. Not mine. Not the echo of my own tired steps. Something else. Someone else. I froze. The sound came from deeper in the tunnel. Slow. Measured. Not hurried, but deliberate. A rhythm like a metronome marking out some grim countdown. I leaned back against the wall, trying to make myself small, invisible. But the stale air carried the footsteps closer, each tap on the concrete like a hammer on a coffin lid. "Hello?" I called out, voice cracking. No answer. Only the footsteps continued, coming nearer, then stopping. Silence. Complete silence. I forced my breath to steady. "Look, I don't want trouble." I tried to sound calm, but my voice wavered. Then, a whisper. So soft I thought I imagined it. "You shouldn't be here." The voice was low, rough, and close enough to send chills slithering down my spine. I scanned the darkness, heart slamming against ribs like a trapped animal. The walls seemed to press in tighter, the stale air turning suffocating. I wanted to run, but where? The exit sign mocked me, the same cracked promise I couldn't reach. I swallowed again, voice barely a whisper. "I'm lost. Please, I just want to get out." More steps. Slowly, carefully, around the corner. Then a figure emerged. A man. Thin, ragged clothes, eyes sunken but sharp. His face was smeared with dirt, but his gaze was clear, cold, calculating. He held nothing in his hands, but his smile was the kind that didn't reach the eyes. Something about him screamed danger, but not the kind you could fight. No, this was something worse, the quiet menace of a man who'd been here too long, tangled in the darkness until he was part of it. "You're not supposed to be wandering these tunnels," he said, voice like gravel. "People come down here, they don't leave. Not the way they came." I'm just trying to find the stairs, I said, voice trembling. Please. I'm tired. I'm scared. He chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. Scared. That's good. Fear keeps you alive. He took a step closer. But you don't belong here. This place, it changes people. Breaks them. I felt the walls pulse again, the plaster rippling under my fingers. The tunnel was closing in. No way out. Just the man in the stale air and the endless maze. Then something inside me snapped. Fear was a cage. But it wasn't the only thing. I straightened, shoulders squared despite the pounding in my chest. I'm not leaving. Not like this. He raised an eyebrow. Oh. And what will you do? Wait for someone to find you? The city doesn't care about the forgotten. I'll find my own way, I said, voice firmer now. I'm not giving up. For a long moment, he just watched me. Then he nodded, almost approvingly. Maybe you're different. Maybe you'll last longer than the others. I didn't know if that was a threat or a warning. Probably both. He stepped back into the shadows and vanished. The echo of his footsteps faded, leaving me alone again. The stale smell softened, the walls settled. The exit sign flickered a little brighter. I took a deep breath, the stale air filling my lungs, and stood up. My legs ached, but I moved forward. This time, when the tunnel warped and twisted, I didn't panic. I counted the cracks in the walls, the patterns of peeling paint, the faint hum of distant pipes. I focused on anything real, anything concrete. And then, finally, I saw it. A shaft of pale daylight filtering in through a grate far above. Fresh air rushing down, carrying the scent of city streets and rain. I climbed toward it, hands scraping against rusted metal rungs, heart beating a steady rhythm of hope. When I emerged, blinking against the sudden brightness, I was drenched in sweat and dirt, but alive. The city smelled different after days underground, sharp, alive, noisy. People passed without noticing me, absorbed in their own lives. A woman with a stroller smiled briefly. A man on his phone laughed at something unseen. The world was moving. Real. I leaned against a brick wall, breathing the cool air, tasting freedom on my tongue. The cracked exit sign was behind me now, buried deep beneath feet and concrete in time. I didn't look back. I thought about the man in the tunnel, the way the maze had tried to swallow me whole. He was a part of that darkness, forged by it. I wasn't. Not anymore. I'd face the underground and come out the other side, not unscathed, but unbroken. The city pulsed around me, indifferent but alive, and I stepped forward into it, carrying every scar and every breath. The nightmare was over. Story 6, Mirror Doubles, When Familiar Faces Deceive. The first time I noticed something was wrong, I was standing at the corner of Oak and Fifth, waiting for the dim light that cast long, dancing shadows to change, and I caught my reflection in the glass of the bookstore window. I know how that sounds. Maybe I was tired. Or maybe I'd been reading too many crime novels lately, letting my imagination run wild. Still, the feeling didn't leave me. It was the kind of chill that crawls up your spine when you remember a forgotten thought but can't quite place it. Like lukewarm coffee you'd set down hours ago, and now it smells off. My life had been quiet. Too quiet, sometimes. I worked at an architecture firm downtown, mostly drawing plans and checking details. I liked the predictability. The familiar hum of the office, the clack of keyboards, the faint scent of printer ink and stale coffee. My apartment was a small, cluttered space on the third floor of a brick building that smelled faintly of damp plaster and old paint. I liked the way the late afternoon sun hit the peeling wallpaper just right, casting long shadows that made the room feel bigger than it was. My closest friends were few but steady: Jamie, who worked at the cafe down the street, and my sister, Leah, who lived a few blocks away. We met regularly for dinners or weekend walks, nothing extravagant. Normal life. So when I first saw the stranger who looked exactly like Jamie, sitting at the cafe counter drinking a latte, I didn't think much of it. People have lookalikes, right? But this one, he laughed at the same jokes, tilted his head the same way, even had the same nervous tick of pushing his glasses up the bridge of his nose. The problem was this: Jamie was quieter, colder somehow, like an actor who'd studied the role too hard. I caught his eye once, and he smiled too fast, too perfectly, like he was waiting for me to say something. I didn't. I just left the cafe with a strange tightness in my chest. That night, when I called my real Jamie to ask if she'd been at the cafe earlier, she sounded confused. I was at home all day, she said, watching that new show you recommended. Why? I hung up, my fingers trembling. Maybe I was imagining things. Maybe the late shifts at work were messing with me. But I couldn't shake it. The next morning, on the subway, I saw Leah, or someone who looked exactly like her, sitting a few seats away. She was reading the same book Leah had borrowed last week, the edges of the pages dog-eared just like Leah's. But this version of Leah kept glancing around nervously, her lips pressed into a thin line, and when our eyes met, that same unnatural smile flickered before vanishing. I didn't follow her. I didn't even get off at my usual stop. Instead, I stayed on the train, heart pounding so hard it drowned out the screech of the rails on the tracks. I kept replaying the morning in my head, trying to find a rational explanation. Leah's been stressed lately. Maybe she was out early and just trying to avoid me. Or maybe I was just tired, overthinking. But that afternoon, things got worse. I was at work, sitting in the conference room waiting for a meeting to start, when the door opened and in walked my boss, Mr. Carver. Except it wasn't Mr. Carver. Someone who looked exactly like him, yes, but the way he moved, too smooth, too controlled, felt off. His handshake was colder than usual, fingers stiff when he greeted me, and his smile didn't reach his eyes. I noticed the subtle differences: a faint scar missing from his cheek, a slightly different scent, less of his usual aftershave, more of something metallic. The meeting went on as usual, but I caught him watching me with that same unsettling intensity I'd seen in the others. It was like he was studying me, waiting for a sign that I'd noticed. Afterward, I checked the employee directory on my phone. The real Mr. Carver was listed as out sick for the day. I left the office early, the autumn air biting at my cheeks as I rushed down the street. The city sounded different, too loud and too quiet at the same time. The usual chatter of street vendors, the distant honk of a horn, the rustle of leaves underfoot, it all felt like a background track to something else, something I couldn't quite place. I stopped at a corner store to buy water and noticed the cashier looked like my neighbor, Mrs. Dunlop. Same silver hair tied in a bun, same gentle smile. But when I said hello, the cashier's eyes flickered with something unfamiliar, and she didn't respond. Just stared. I paid quickly and stepped outside, hands clammy. The sun was dipping lower, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch and twist in ways they shouldn't. That night, I barely slept. The apartment was too quiet, the walls closing in. I kept hearing faint footsteps outside my door, but when I checked, no one was there. The smell of damp plaster was stronger, almost suffocating. I pressed my palm against the cold wall, trying to ground myself. In the morning, I sat at the kitchen table, sipping bitter coffee, staring at my phone. There was a message from Jamie. "Hey, sorry I missed your call. Are you okay?" I hesitated before typing back, not sure if I could explain any of this. I wanted to tell someone, anyone. But who would believe me? that strangers were walking around, wearing the faces of the people I loved, acting like them but not quite. Something just beneath the surface was wrong. The real terror wasn't the strangers themselves. It was the way they were quietly taking over. The way they slipped into routines, into conversations, into lives that weren't theirs. And me? I was left watching, invisible, like a ghost in my own world. I opened the window and let the cold morning air wash over me. The city was waking up, unaware of the cracks spreading beneath its calm surface. I wondered how long before the people I knew disappeared entirely, replaced by these perfect, empty copies. I didn't want to believe it, but something was coming. Something I couldn't stop. And maybe, just maybe, the hardest part was realizing I might be the only one who noticed. Silence. Complete silence. I couldn't sleep. The room felt colder than before, the curtains barely moving despite the faint breeze from the cracked window. Outside, the city murmured softly, distant sirens, the hum of early traffic, a dog barking somewhere down the block. Quiet, but alive. The kind of quiet that made the shadows in the corners sharper, the silence heavier. I sat up and pulled my knees close, staring at the dark ceiling. My thoughts swirled, stubborn and relentless. Those copies, the strangers who wore the faces of my friends and family, were no longer just oddities in the periphery. They had started to replace the real people. I remembered the look on my mother's face yesterday, or what I thought was my mother. There was something mechanical in the way she smiled, her eyes lacking the warmth I knew so well. It wasn't just mimicry anymore. It was erasure. The morning light felt too sharp when it finally spilled through the window. I lay still, listening to the city stretch awake, trying to map out a plan. I needed more than intuition. I needed proof. I started with my phone, scrolling through messages, pictures, anything that might show differences. But every photo of my family, my friends, was the same, smiling, familiar. The copies were indistinguishable from the originals in images. Maybe because the change happened in person, in those little moments, the way they spoke, the way they moved. My eyes caught the screen flashing, an incoming message from Sarah. That was something. I hadn't talked to her since yesterday, and I wasn't sure if the Sarah I texted was real or not. I hesitated, thumb hovering. Then I typed, "Can we meet? I need to see you." Sent. The reply came quickly. Sure. Coffee at the usual place? I felt a flicker of relief. If Sarah was still Sarah, maybe I wasn't losing my mind entirely. The coffee shop smelled like burnt espresso and something sweet, vanilla syrup, maybe. I always liked that smell. When I walked in, the bell above the door jingled softly, and I spotted her immediately. Sarah sat at our usual table by the window, her hair pulled back, eyes scanning her phone. But then I saw it, something off. A twitch in her lip, the way her fingers tapped rhythmically on the table, too precise, too deliberate. The Sarah I knew was more careless, more spontaneous. She looked up and smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Hey," she said, voice steady but oddly flat. I sat down slowly, watching her. "Can I ask you something weird?" She nodded, almost too eagerly. "Do you ever feel like you're not yourself? Like someone else is watching you from the inside?" Her smile faltered for a fraction of a second. "What's that supposed to mean?" I leaned in, lowering my voice. "I saw someone today. Someone who looked exactly like my mom, but it wasn't her. It was like a shadow, or a mask. And then I saw it again with others." Sarah's eyes narrowed. "You mean those rumors? People saying there are imposters? Con artists or maybe some kind of cult?" I shook my head. "No cults. No scams. It's different. They're not trying to trick anyone, at least not openly. They're just there, taking over. She frowned, biting her lip. That sounds crazy. You sure you're okay? I could feel the heat rising in my face, frustration bubbling up. I know how it sounds, but I'm not imagining this. I still can't explain it. She looked away, scanning the street outside. All right. Let's say I believe you. What do you want to do? Find out who they are, how they're doing it, and stop them before it's too late. Sarah sighed, rubbing her temples. That's a lot. And dangerous, if it's true. Exactly. We spent the next hour talking in hushed tones, piecing together what little I'd noticed, the way the copies avoided deep conversation, how their schedules were strangely consistent, almost rehearsed. They took over jobs, relationships, routines. Slowly, methodically. After Sarah left, I didn't go home. Instead, I wandered the streets, retracing my steps from the previous day. The city felt different now, less familiar, more uncertain. I passed the grocery store where my sister worked. She wasn't there. The clerk gave me a blank look when I asked about her. Later, I saw her. Or what looked like her. She was walking down the street, but something was wrong. She didn't wave when she saw me. Didn't even glance in my direction. It was as though she no longer recognized me. I followed at a distance, heart pounding, careful not to make a sound. She entered a small, nondescript building I'd never noticed before, a place with no sign, just a plain door. The air around it smelled faintly of damp concrete and something metallic. I stood there, my palms pressed against the cold brick wall, listening. Inside, I heard muffled voices, low, controlled, almost rehearsed. Then footsteps. Fast, purposeful. The door opened, and a woman stepped out. She glanced around, her eyes briefly locking with mine. No recognition. No sign of the sister I knew. I swallowed hard. Was she one of them? Had the real her been replaced already? The thoughts settled like ice in my stomach. I kept watching as more people entered and left the building, faces I recognized, but with the same hollow expression. They moved differently, spoke differently, as if they were actors in a poorly written play. Suddenly, my phone buzzed. It was a message from an unknown number. I see you. A chill ran down my spine. I glanced around, but the street was empty except for a stray cat darting into an alley. The city noises seemed to dim, the air thickening with unease. I wanted to delete the message, to pretend it never arrived. But curiosity won over fear. Who are you? I typed back, fingers trembling. No reply. I shoved my phone into my pocket and started walking home, eyes darting to every shadow, ears straining for the slightest sound. When I got back to my apartment, the hallway felt narrower, darker. The usual hum of the building was muted, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. I checked the locks twice, then sat down, trying to steady my shaking hands. My mind raced. If they were taking people one by one, replacing them with these copies, what chance did I have? How long before I was alone, truly alone? I thought about calling the police, telling them everything. But who would believe me? They'd probably think I was losing it. I needed allies. But who? Sarah seemed unsure. My family was disappearing. My friends were drifting away, their faces becoming masks. I stared at the ceiling, the quiet pressing in. Then, a sound. From the apartment next door. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate. Not familiar. I held my breath, listening. The doorknob rattled. Silence. And then, a soft click. Someone was inside. I didn't know who, but I knew it wasn't me. The room felt colder again, and the night was far from over. The doorknob rattled again. This time, slower, almost hesitating. My breath caught, the air thick in my throat. The light above flickered, casting a stuttering glow that made the peeling paint on the hallway walls look like crawling veins. I stayed frozen, ears straining for any hint beyond the metallic jingle. Then, the door clicked open. I could almost taste the stale scent of the building, the faint musk of damp carpet, old wood, and something else, something metallic lurking underneath. The kind of smell you don't notice until it's wrong. Like a bruise you can't see. The silhouette stepped out. Tall, but not quite right. It moved smoothly, without the little awkward pauses my neighbor used to have. No nervous coughs or fumbling with keys. Just perfect. I swallowed hard. My hands trembled enough to make my phone screen blur in the dim light. I debated running, but the hallway suddenly felt like a trap, walls closing in, the ceiling pressing down. "Hello?" I whispered, voice cracking. The figure stopped, turned. It smiled too wide, too fixed. The eyes held none of the warmth I remembered. Instead, cold calculation. And maybe amusement. "I'm sorry," it said, voice exactly like my neighbor's but somehow too even, too rehearsed. "I didn't mean to startle you." I nodded, unable to trust myself to speak. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped animal. I could feel the sticky sweat under my arms, the chill crawling down my spine. It took a step closer. "You've noticed, haven't you?" I blinked. Noticed what? My voice felt like it belonged to someone else. That we're here. That things are changing. I wanted to say no, tell myself this was some sick joke. But the knot in my stomach tightened. This wasn't an accident. It wasn't random. They were watching me, watching all of us. A cold wind pushed past us in the hallway. The building groaned, the pipes rattled, and a distant dog barked once, sharp and out of place. The figure's eyes caught mine, unblinking. "We don't want to hurt you," it said softly. "But you need to understand. You're out of time." I swallowed again, dry and thick. Out of time for what? The smile didn't waver. For running. That was the moment I realized something I'd been avoiding, twisting away from in my mind. This wasn't about strangers mimicking my family or friends anymore. This was about me. About my choices. About control. I was cornered. I wanted to ask who they were, what they wanted. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, I stepped back, almost tripping over my own feet, and pressed myself against the wall. The rough plaster scraped my skin, grounding me in the moment. "Why are you doing this?" I finally managed, voice barely above a whisper. "Because it's necessary," it said. "Because change is inevitable. You see it. You feel it. But you're resisting." I shook my head, fighting the rising panic. This isn't change. It's erasure. You're erasing them. Erasing me. "No," it said quietly. "We're preserving. Improving. You just don't understand yet." The light flickered again, plunging us briefly into darkness. In that split second, my mind raced through everything I'd seen, the empty faces, the hollow smiles, the way everyone around me was slipping further away. When the light returned, the figure was gone. I was alone. The silence was deafening. I shoved my phone out of my pocket, thumb trembling as I dialed Sarah's number. The line rang once, twice, then cut to voicemail. No message. No answer. I tried again. Same result. The apartment felt colder now, the shadows deeper, as if the walls themselves were swallowing the light. My chest tightened. The building's usual hum was gone, replaced by a suffocating stillness. I paced, fingertips grazing the cracked wallpaper, tracing patterns only I could see. The taste of bitter coffee lingered on my tongue from earlier, but it didn't help. It never did. Hours passed, or was it minutes? Time slipped, warped by the tension pressing down on me. I thought about leaving. Packing a bag, getting out of the city. Anywhere but here. But then I remembered the empty chairs at dinner, the unanswered texts, the faces that weren't quite right. They were everywhere. I wasn't safe. And wherever I went, they would follow. The thought twisted my stomach into knots. I sat down, head in hands, the weight of exhaustion dragging at my bones. If I couldn't trust my own senses, my own memories, what was left? My phone buzzed suddenly, an incoming message. I froze, heart skipping. The screen lit up with a single line, "We're closer than you think." No number. No name. Just those words. I wanted to delete it. Throw the phone against the wall. Run into the street and never look back. Instead, I stared at the screen, the room, with its faint smell of dust and decay closing in. Because now I knew. There was no escape. Not anymore. A cold sweat broke across my forehead as the silence thickened around me. Every shadow seemed alive, every creak in the floorboards a whisper of something unseen. I wasn't just being watched, I was hunted. My hands trembled as the glow from the phone screen faded into the dark room. I wasn't safe. Not here. Not anywhere. The floor creaked beneath me, just a house settling, or something else. I wasn't sure anymore. Every sound was a question mark, every shadow a looming figure just beyond the thin veil of sight. I forced myself to stand, the room spinning slightly. The faint hum of the street lamp outside seeped through the cracked window, casting a weak orange glow that barely held the darkness at bay. I had to move. Do something. But what? Where? The faces. The voices. They echoed in my mind, mocking, twisting, familiar but wrong. Like old photographs distorted by water. I thought of my sister, her laugh now something I couldn't trust. My mother's smile, too perfect, too rehearsed. Even my best friend's casual shrug felt like a scripted gesture from some cruel play. I needed proof. I needed to know what was real. The phone buzzed again, this time with a soft vibration that sent a ripple of cold through me. I stared at it, willing myself to ignore it, but curiosity clawed at the edges of my resolve. The screen lit up with a new message, "Look outside." I hesitated. The room suddenly felt colder, the silence louder. The old plaster walls seemed to lean in, listening. I crept to the window, heart hammering like a frantic drumbeat. The glass was rough with grime, the streetlight flickering erratically. I pressed my forehead against the cool surface and scanned the sidewalk below. There. A figure stood motionless beneath the shaky light, my father. Or at least, the person who wore his face and his coat. The way he tilted his head, the slow, deliberate tapping of a finger against his chin, all mimicked him with unnerving accuracy. But something was wrong. The eyes empty, cold, too still. They didn't move when I blinked or shifted. They didn't look like my father. They looked like a hollow imitation. I swallowed back the dry lump in my throat and pulled away from the window. The room felt suddenly smaller, the walls closing in. My breath rattled in my chest, shallow and quick. I couldn't stay here. Not with them just outside. The next morning arrived on a brittle edge of gray light that barely pierced the heavy curtains. I didn't sleep. Instead, I sat in the dark, watching the phone screen like a lifeline, waiting for another message, another clue. The house was silent except for the distant wail of a siren and the low hum of traffic that felt detached, like it belonged to someone else's world. I needed to face it. Whatever it was. I slipped into my coat, the fabric rough against my skin, and stepped outside. The air was cold, biting at my cheeks and nose. The neighborhood was eerily quiet. Doors shut tight, windows dark. The usual morning chatter of neighbors was missing. My footsteps echoed too loud on the cracked pavement. I walked toward the street corner where I'd seen the figure last night. But the spot was empty now. A sudden rustle behind me made me spin around. Nothing but a stray cat slinking under a parked car, eyes gleaming like tiny moons. I exhaled, the breath misting in the chill air. Then I heard the footsteps. Slow. Measured. Behind me. Matching mine. I didn't dare look. Hello? My voice cracked, brittle and uncertain. No answer. Just the soft crunch of gravel underfoot. I started walking faster. The footsteps quickened, mirroring my pace. My heart hammered against my ribs like it wanted to escape. I risked a glance. There, just a few feet behind me, was my best friend. The same casual grin, the same easy stride. But the smile didn't reach the eyes. They were too sharp, too calculating. The way he looked at me didn't feel like recognition, it felt like assessment, like I was an experiment or a puzzle to be solved. Hey, I said, voice barely above a whisper. What are you? He stopped, tilt of his head exactly the way my friend always did when confused. You're coming with us. The words were calm, almost polite. But the undertone was unmistakable. I swallowed hard, my skin prickling with cold sweat. Who's us? I managed. He didn't answer. Instead, he took a step closer, the streetlight flickering overhead casting jagged shadows across his face. I stumbled backward, heart slamming in my ears. The world felt off-kilter, the edges of my vision blurring. Then, from around the corner, more figures appeared. Familiar faces, my mother, my sister, the neighbors, all moving with the same eerie precision, their eyes locked on me like predators closing in. I backed into a doorway, the rough brick biting into my palms as I braced myself. My breath came in ragged gasps, fogging the cold air. We don't want to hurt you, my sister's voice said, sweet and hollow. We just want you to understand. Understand what? I whispered, trembling. That you're the one who's lost. That you don't belong anymore. Their voices were a chorus of false warmth, a sickening lullaby that made my skin crawl. I shook my head, the fog in my mind thickening. This couldn't be real. It wasn't real. It had to be a nightmare. But the cold hands of panic gripped me tighter with every passing second. I realized then the true horror wasn't that they had taken over my friends and family. It was that they wanted me to join whatever this was. To disappear into the same hollow imitation. I looked down the street, searching for an escape. The empty road stretched into darkness, no help waiting at the end. The footsteps closed in. I clenched my fists, nails digging into my palms. No tool. No violence. Just me. Just will. Why? I demanded, voice cracking. Why me? What do you want from me? My father stepped forward, the flicker of streetlight catching the sharp line of his jaw. Because you're the last piece. And you're running out of time. The words hit like ice water, freezing the blood in my veins. I took a step back, then another, heart thrumming like a frantic bird trapped in a cage. Then, without warning, they surrounded me. Not violently, but with an oppressive closeness that crushed the air, cold and heavy with silence from my lungs. Their presence was suffocating, a living wall of intent. I swallowed the bile rising in my throat. The night stretched endlessly, each second a slow spiral into something I couldn't fight with fists or fury. I needed to think. To find a crack in their perfect mimicry. A weakness. But as their faces closed in, one thought burned brighter than all the fear. If they could take everyone I loved, then what did that make me? Just another stranger waiting to be replaced. The street lamp flickered one last time and died. Silence. Complete silence. Then, my phone buzzed again. It's time. I didn't move. I couldn't. A cold draft slipped through the cracked window, carrying with it a whisper that didn't belong to this world. And somewhere deep inside, a voice whispered that maybe, just maybe, I was already too late. I didn't move. I couldn't. The weight of those faces pressed against me like frozen glass, cold and unyielding. The street lamp flickered one last time and died, plunging us into a darkness so complete I couldn't even see my own hands in front of me. Silence. Complete silence. Then, my phone buzzed again, just one message, stark and simple. It's time. The words were a verdict. No invitations left, no room for argument. I was the last piece. The final note in a song that had been playing without me noticing, its melody twisting into something I couldn't hum along to anymore. Something inside me shifted then, not a scream, not a fight, but a quiet, brittle resolve. If they thought I would just roll over, let the world slip through my fingers like sand, they hadn't counted on how far I could go when there was nothing left to lose. I broke the circle. One step. Then another. The air didn't clear. Their eyes followed, unblinking, but I moved. My hands trembled so badly I almost dropped my phone. I looked up, searching for light, for anything, but the street was a black hole swallowing sound and color. Even the usual hum of distant traffic was gone. The night was dead. I ran. Not far, just to the edge of the park where the streetlights still flickered weakly. My breath came in ragged bursts, the cold air sharp against my lungs, stinging like I had swallowed shards of glass. I could still feel their eyes on me, 1,000 invisible needles pricking my skin. I didn't know where I was going. It didn't matter. The next morning, I woke up on my couch, the faint smell of burnt coffee still lingering in the air, cold and heavy with silence. The TV flickered silently, forgotten. My phone was dead, screen cracked from some careless fall during the night. I sat there, the ache in my ribs dulling but persistent, like a bruise I couldn't see. I thought about the message. It's time. What time? Whose time? And what exactly was I supposed to do? I pulled my jacket tight around me and stepped outside. The neighborhood was eerily quiet, too quiet for a Saturday morning. No kids yelling, no cars rushing by. Only the soft rustle of leaves and a distant dog barking twice before silence reclaimed the street. I walked slowly, eyes darting to every window, every shadow. The houses looked the same, but the people inside them didn't. Or rather, they did, but not really. Not the people I remembered. At the corner store, I saw her, my mother, or the thing wearing my mother's face. She smiled at the cashier with the same warmth I'd known for years, but her eyes didn't reach her smile. They were flat, rehearsed, like a mask slipping at the edges. I wanted to call out, to reach her, but my voice caught in my throat. Instead, I turned and walked away, my footsteps echoing against the cracked pavement. Back home, I found a letter slipped under my door. No handwriting I recognized. Just a single sentence. You can't fight what you don't understand. I spent the day pacing, trying to piece together what had happened, what was happening. The faces, the voices, the subtle changes that made everyone around me feel like a mirror cracked into 1,000 shards. I thought about the man from the alley, the way he had said I was the last piece. Was I the last one who hadn't been replaced? Or was I the next target? The sun dipped below the horizon, and the shadows grew long and twisted. I sat by my window, watching the streetlights flicker on one by one, each a small beacon in the gathering dark. The world was still moving forward, indifferent to the fractures beneath its surface. I realized then that I was trapped not by the strangers who wore my family's faces, but by the silence they demanded. The quiet that swallowed my questions, my doubts, my memories. And yet, something inside me refused to break. Night came again. This time, I waited. When the shadows gathered, when the street lamp sputtered and died, I didn't run. I stepped outside. The air was thick with expectation, heavy with the scent of damp earth and cold stone. The strangers appeared, emerging from the dark like ghosts summoned by some cruel spell. Their eyes locked on me, faces perfect copies of the people I loved, but their presence was no longer suffocating, it was a challenge. You're the last piece, the man said again, stepping forward. But this time, I met his gaze without flinching. What happens if I don't play your game? I asked, voice low but steady. If I refuse to be replaced? He smiled, a slow, deliberate curl of lips that didn't reach his eyes. Then you disappear. Like the others. I swallowed, the cold creeping into my bones. But I didn't back down. I'm already here, I said. You can't erase who I am. For a moment, the circle around me wavered, faces flickering like static on a broken screen. The oppressive silence cracked, and I heard something faint, laughter. Or maybe just the wind. Then they stepped back, dissolving into the night, leaving me alone under the flickering street lamp. I stood there, heart pounding, breath heavy in the cold air. The message had been a summons. The challenge had been laid down. But I had answered. Whatever this was, this dark tide swallowing faces and lives, it hadn't won. The next days were quieter. The neighborhood started to feel less like a stage and more like a home again. The people, my people, were back. Or close enough. At least, the strangers stopped trying to be perfect. My mother smiled more naturally. My sister laughed without the strange stiffness I'd feared. The shadows still lingered at the edges of my vision, but they no longer chased me. I knew the threat hadn't vanished. It was a scar beneath the surface, something I'd carry with me, a reminder that nothing was quite as it seemed. That the people we trust can be strangers in disguise, and sometimes, the hardest fight is to hold on to yourself when the world tries to rewrite who you are. I looked in the mirror one morning, tracing the lines on my face with a trembling finger. I wasn't the same person who'd started this nightmare. Maybe I never would be. But I was still me. And for now, that was enough.